Hey Terry, how are you?
Hey Trent, I'm doing good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today. It's really great to have you.
Of course, my pleasure.
Now, Terry, you may have listened to the podcast before, but we start this the same way every time. It seems to be a
Mm,
great conversation starter or icebreaker, they would say. Um, and I think it's particularly pertinent for a man like you who makes the kind of games that you make as well with such,
mm.
I want to say retro aesthetics, but you and I might be getting old enough for them to be vintage aesthetics. but
Right.
what is your earliest memory playing video games? And even if it's not your earliest memory, what was the one that like really affected you? When a switch flicked in your brain.
Right. Well, there are two steps to that question. The first one, like the very first memory, is actually as basic as it gets. It was Super Mario Brothers one. So
Yeah,
when I
nice.
was three, yeah. So when I was three, my brother, when he turned five, he's 2 years older than me, and he got
Mhm.
an NES for his birthday, and it came with the like the Duck Hunt
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, and so yeah, no, I just remember playing Super Mario Brothers one, and just the idea that like I could make things move myself, and all the sounds were happening, and all the feedback, and then just trying to learn, trying to get better. Him
yeah.
telling me, "Yeah, there's a secret in that pitfall, so that I die, he gets the controller again," all that. No, so yeah, I was three, and I kind of I never looked back. I
Yeah.
have to say though that I want to add a second part to that
Please,
answer
yeah.
is. Um, so it was Chrono Trigger when I didn't speak any English back then. We didn't get games in French in Quebec. We didn't get the French localization because we're not enough enough French speakers
Right.
in
Of
North
course. I
America to
never
get
thought
them.
about that. Yeah, what an interesting complication. I never
Mm.
thought. Wow,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I basically played through that game, like kind of making up the story myself, you know. But so and we didn't know what RPGs were. We just called them games where you hit and there's a number that appears, you know. And
which is not wrong, yeah.
yeah, and we got Chrono Trigger because of the two characters on the key art, right? We thought it was a
Right,
co-op
yes.
game, and we come home and my friend's like, the game keeps talking all the time, and then it's just a game that talks. We're not gonna understand anything. It's single player. I'm going home, and so I just kept playing because you remember when
Yeah,
you
of
rent
course.
a game as a kid, it's all you got for the weekend, so you stick to it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that was the moment where I entered Guardia Forest, right?
Hmm.
And the music just hit me. And I
Yeah.
remember just the ambience of that forest with the music. It was so I was 10, and it was the first time where I had the sense that there was a warm guiding hand behind the
Yeah.
thing that I was consuming as the player, right? And
Yeah.
it just hit me fully, like someone made this. For some reason, that was the moment where games stopped like falling from the sky into my
Yes.
life.
Yeah,
I
right.
understood there was someone, and I kind of came online
Yeah.
in that moment as like I also want to be a creator, you know, of games. And so yeah, that game is kind of like the real big step for me.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that because I think definitely I'm sure almost every game developer out there has that moment where I used to
Mm.
have a friend who was a film buff, and he used to talk about watching movies with your eyes open, like the difference
Oh.
between like just, sitting there and, consuming movies and then actually like watching cinema or,
Mm.
watching them as something different. And I
Mm.
feel it's the same thing for us. Like, I mean, for me, it was Zelda Ocarina of Time, like
Oh,
that was,
nice.
that was the game that,
uh,
as you say, it's almost like I stopped being into video games and started being into like the medium itself.
mhm.
Like there
Right.
was the experience was just so all consuming and so interesting, and like for the same reasons that you were saying about Chrono as well as.
Mm.
But yeah, like a switch flicked for me as well. There. How old were
Mm.
you around that time, Terry, when you were playing Chrono Trigger?
Yeah, I was 10.
Mm.
So it's like I don't know how long it had been since the game had come out or anything. It was
Yeah.
just like, you look at all the covers and you're like, let's pick this one. We didn't really have a sense of where they came from or anything. And yeah, and the thing is, after that moment of just basking in the music, I
Yeah.
entered my first combat, and I called back my friend like, "Oh, it's a game where you hit and there's a number." And then he came back, and then we played nothing but that for like 2 years. We
That's
just
awesome.
we played all of it like back and forth, and like all the endings, and discover everything in the game. And it's like, we never
I,
looked back basically.
I love what you mentioned about, you're a kid and it's all you like, it's the game you've got for the weekend, so you you have
Oh
to play
yeah.
that. Like now kids obviously they have the App Store or Game Pass or
Mm,
whatever, they can just flick between whatever they want whilst being on
right.
TikTok, I'm sure. But I remember
Mm.
that I had Shadowgate on the NES. We
Oh
used to go
wow.
to the local pawn store slash like secondhand store, and I would just grab whatever game was there. And there was
Mm.
Shadowgate was there one, and I was just like looked at the box, it looked amazing. And then you get in and you're moving through the rooms. But as I was only like 9 or 8 or something, so I could only progress like 5 rooms. But I just played those 5 rooms
Mm.
over and over for, like you say, like probably weeks, because it was the only
Yeah.
game I had at that point in time. It was just like you just let it wash over you.
Oh, so good.
So I'm interested as well with Chrono Trigger to think it just because we're obviously going to talk a bunch about Sea of Stars, no
Mhm.
doubt. What, like, you're saying that you're playing a game, as you put it, the game where you hit and the numbers come out. You
Yeah.
don't understand the story, but obviously it's a huge element of it and the ambience that you're talking about. What
Mm.
was it that caught you in those moments? Was it the ambience that kept you playing, or was it what got you hooked? Was the even without the understanding the English, were the mechanics of the
Mm.
fighting what you and your mate were getting into?
Right. Well, so a lot of it was the music, was how
Mm,
cool the characters looked, and
yeah,
they they reminded us, because you could see their portraits, their close-up
yeah.
portraits in the menus, and they reminded us of Dragon Ball, which we didn't even know it was the actual guy who had designed them. We were
Oh,
just like, oh, it looks kind of similar. That's kind of cool,
yeah,
and
that's
we
awesome.
felt like it was something we made up ourselves, but
The
when it
Dragon
was
Ball
the
game.
actual effect of it, yeah, because we wanted like a Dragon Ball turn-based game, and which we sort of never got here, at least. But um, and yeah, and so no, so playing it, a lot of it was just the gameplay mechanic and
Yeah,
exploring the areas and listening to
yeah,
the music and all of that. And then we still had like some English classes, in
yeah. Of
school, so we could
course,
kind
picking
of,
up
but
bits
yeah,
and
but
pieces.
and definitely like self-teaching English through games was played a big part,
Yeah.
actually. Like this game and Super Mario RPG as well were two big ones, where you just sit with your French English dictionary trying
Mhm.
to make out, like trying to
Yes, of course.
understand everything that happens, and you don't really get it, and so you replay them 37 times, in a year, and you keep like, oh, I think that's what they meant, I think that's a
Yeah,
callback to that thing, and we start building our own version of the story. But also, I think Chrono Trigger, where it shines and where it really aged well, is it's everything is very simple and self-contained, and the pacing of it kind of always keeps on going.
it's very tight and it's
um,
got that momentum.
yeah, it's not about this like I mean, I love my Final Fantasy VI, but Chrono Trigger is not about like this like empire and like a big conflict and like
Yeah,
different
yeah.
continents and like ancient history of a thing. It's like you're always there, touching and feeling
It's more
the
personal.
ingredients. Yeah, of course,
Yeah,
and it's more about it's a personal story within a grander conflict, but you
yeah,
get that sense of intimacy between the
yeah,
characters a bit more. And so I feel like that's something, like having had sort of the experience of playing it kind of blindfolded when it comes to the writing.
yeah,
I'm here to say that in a lot of ways, these narrative design choices, they carry over through the other pillars of the game. They don't only rely on overtly saying things. You kind of get to feel them. When, like, the bridge is broken, you go to get the lunch. You don't get the full dialogue, but you understand that there's a brother
yes,
helping out. Someone is hungry, so you
yeah.
still build some sense of what's happening. It's not just there's a lot of show don't tell, basically, going on in
Yeah,
that game.
it's actually a really great testament to the game being like a sum of its parts and like all of the
Mm.
elements of the game communicating its narrative, right? Like if you're sitting there 10 years old, can't understand English or just a small amount of English, and you're able to still understand the narrative to some
Mm.
degree. It reminds me when I was in Japan recently for Bit Summit, my last day was in
Oh.
Tokyo, and the new Miyazaki film was out because it's been out for months, in the Studio Ghibli film in
Mm.
Japan. And I was looking for like subtitled sessions, and I was almost not going to go because there were no subtitled sessions. And then I thought,
Uh,
well, like I'm in Japan, like it's going to be his last film, quote unquote.
yeah.
Why don't I just go and like just let it wash over me? So I
Mm.
went, and also Greg Rice, PlayStation,
Oh,
had just done that as well, and so I was like, did you find subtitles? He's like, no, I just let it wash over me. I was like, dope, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go do the same thing. So I
nice.
went and I sat in a packed cinema in between these two Japanese kids and watched the
Mm.
Studio Ghibli film completely in Japanese. And like I know maybe 10 words of Japanese.
Yeah.
And I was like, obviously it was a completely surreal experience. And I was about
Mm.
40 minutes into the film. I thought I was following it. And then something happened. I was like, okay, I don't think I have any idea what the story is right now. But I actually watched the trailer just 2 weeks ago. And I was like, oh yeah, I had no idea what was going on in this
Wow.
film. Like
Okay.
completely different story. But it was still obviously an amazing experience. Now, the question for you, going back to Chrono
Mm.
years later, when whether there was a French version or whether you played it in English and you were
Mm.
able to pick it up, was it was it what you expected it to be? Have you gone back and played it again?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've beaten this game at least once a year since
Okay.
since back in the day. Yeah, and I still do it to this day. But so no, so yeah, no, this game is super. Like, it's kind of like my happy place. I like to go
Yeah,
back there, and,
love
and
it.
I want to find new places, new things to try, and all. And I still have a theory that every single character has a special name, and if you give them each of them their special name, something will happen. I'm still missing two, so I don't know, maybe one day, but probably not.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, and so I mean, it's not that I got to play it again, and now I understood everything. I sort of my understanding of English grew as this
Yeah,
game was a constant in my life, so I didn't have like a
beautiful.
moment.
Right. There
I didn't have
wasn't
a,
like
a
a big
before or
flip
after.
moment. You just grew with it and it sort of, yeah,
Right,
it
right.
sort of grew with you. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad we spent that much time on Chrono because obviously it's had a big impact. And it's probably the most pertinent answer to this question that we've had
Mm.
for a while. Claudio, our producer, as well, is saying that he's happy we're speaking about Chrono Trigger too. It's one of his favorite games. So, look, what next? I mean, you're 5 years old. You get the NES. You play Super Mario Brothers. You're
Mm.
playing Chrono Trigger. It's grabbed you. You've had that moment where you switch from being someone who plays video games to someone who's almost like seen the medium, and is now experiencing it as a medium.
Yeah.
Did you know you wanted to make games, Terry? Like, what was? Give me the sort of the next steps to.
Yeah, so I knew I did, but I didn't know it was an option. There's kind of this sense of like Quebec in Quebec City, it's like it's 100% French,
Mhm.
and it's kind of understood like it's not a lot is going to happen in French, or
Yeah.
like
Right. Okay.
you need to kind of, and it sounded like, oh man, I have to move to somewhere where it's English speaking. It seemed
Yeah.
very daunting. So for a very long time, it was kind of like an abstract idea, like it would be nice, but unfortunately it's kind of not for me because of
Yeah.
circumstances, and it's kind of what I was telling myself. And so the click moment that it could be a career was actually when Prince of Persia Sands of Time
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
because it was developed in Montreal, and it was kind of like, or at least to me, or to what I was aware of back in the day, um, it was kind of like, okay, this was made here and it's internationally relevant, quote
Yeah.
unquote. And I was like, okay, no, I'm starting to understand now that there is, like, locally or around me, there can be an industry, it can exist. There was still no
Yeah.
way to really like study that in any fashion. And so yeah, that's where it kind of started growing. But since childhood, I had been building this kind of imaginary world in my mind, and all these
Yeah.
characters and all these stories and rules for magic and whatnot. And so that's kind of basically that's what we're building now. Is all of our games are they're not like direct sequels, but they're all tied together in kind of a shared universe, and we're telling
Love
these
it.
kind of big arcs that are really far apart on the timeline,
Yeah.
but still
Yeah.
there's kind of like this underlying consistency to it narratively. So yeah, it all kind of converged into like, oh, it's now kind of more of a thing to be able to work in games, and the studios made it to Quebec City, which is way smaller than Montreal. And so yeah, I was actually able to work from here, start my career actually directly from home.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you founded Sabotage in 2016. Tell
Yep.
us about that. Tell us about your motivation for founding your own studio and it all coming about.
Sure. I mean, it was, well, it was a necessary evil more than anything, I would say. So I graduated from a gameplay programming oriented short course in
Yep.
2007.
Yep.
And just a 1 year thing is all I could do. I couldn't do like IT at university or whatever. So I'm
Yeah.
like,
Right.
oh man,
Okay.
there's no way I can do computer science. I can sit and listen. It needs to be about games.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
And
practical.
so, oh yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise I can't be bothered.
Hmm.
And so I started doing that, and then so for 8 years I was a gameplay coder, and looking at the game designers that I was looking up to when I was a kid. I was like, okay, it seems to me like you go in through one of the crafts. There
Yeah.
was no like game design school right back then, so
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
go in through one of the crafts, and at some point you kind of emerge like, okay, I feel like I can call some shots now on the
Yeah.
floor. And so that was kind of how I saw it. Was like, okay, coding is the thing my brain can probably do because I'm not an artist whatsoever, and um, and so eventually after 8 years of doing that, I felt like, okay, I have these ideas, I'm going to present them. And I had been asking to be put on a design track. I want to become maybe more of a technical game designer, more about gameplay. Eventually I want to direct some projects, but I'm not ready. And anyway, they kept, basically the story was, you're valuable where you are, right? Just go
Yeah.
back to coding, lead your
Yeah.
team, you're
Yeah.
doing
Right.
great. And I understand, right? It's not another business's business to kind of take a risk necessarily on me. But
Yeah.
and I ended up pitching really directly the Messenger, which was our first game, the Ninja side
Yeah.
scroller 8-bit, 16-bit thing, which I had made a prototype for 10 or almost 10 years prior at
Oh
school
wow.
in Flash. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh man, and I drew all the art myself. It's really awesome. But, the atoms were there.
Yeah.
Um, and I got a very clear response for which I'm really thankful, which was basically like, "This is absolutely terrible. It's the proof that you'll never be a designer. Get back to work." And that was like the kick I needed, because I kind of
Yeah.
understood like uh, the very powerful soundbite that I heard was, when someone says you can't do something, it means you can't do it with them, right?
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
can sound basic, but it's like, no, that's true,
No,
right?
that's so
They're
interesting.
saying this idea is terrible, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's terrible for them. If they don't believe it will be terrible. The end result
I've never,
will be bad.
honestly, Terry, I've never heard
Mm,
that
mm,
before, and it's so profound and so wise. It's so often,
mm,
we're told no or something's
yeah,
not possible, but I don't think it is that obvious that like
mm,
actually what that means in most cases is
mm,
that, well, no, you just can't do that with me, or you can't do that with
right.
us, or I don't believe in this thing, whether that's you or whether that's the idea or whether it's the
Mm,
concept, and so it's not necessarily that you're wrong. It's that you actually may be in the wrong company or the wrong. And when I say
exactly.
company, I didn't
Mm,
mean it literally, but I guess it could be a company, or
yeah,
environment or around the wrong people to actually see that
yeah.
idea through. So, and I love as well, there is a particular type of person too that just
Mm,
takes any kind of fuck you as energy and fuel for like
yeah.
motivation to do their own. It seems like you're very clearly that person as well.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah,
People set
for
you on
sure.
fire.
Yeah, for sure. And because and again, it's like, it's also, but it wasn't in a way like, oh, I'm gonna show them. Yeah, because
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the context of like how they operate, they're
It makes
right that it
sense.
was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
fit.
Yeah.
That's, it's not what they do. They're not gonna come up with like a very small team. It was we were like 400 people
Yeah.
doing servicing work for, like, there's a movie coming out, they want a iPad game to go along with it,
Yeah.
things like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit that model on
Yeah.
any
No, that
level.
makes
That's not
sense.
how they present, or anything. um, and so, yeah, basically the next step was like, well, if it's going to happen, I have to do it on my own. But the way I was able to do it, the thing that really worked out for me was, because I had been there for 8 years, well, then you meet people who you're cut from the same cloth, right? You have the same
Yes.
grievances maybe in the way they're working,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh man, we're seeing this way with like less management and making a game we would actually care to play and kind of follow that like
Yeah.
signal that we have, that frequency that we have within ourselves, to just kind of try to pursue that in more of an artistic approach than just like ticking boxes until the client pays and all. And
Yeah.
so anyway, I was able to kind of have like, I had this like, hey guys, if I just build it, will you like be there? And I was like, oh, I guess so. We have level design, and so basically all the pillars were there for a very small team.
All right.
um,
And how many
and so
people was this, Terry? What, were you talking 4 or 5 or something? Or
at first it was, so Phil, our level designer, and I, we worked for about a year before Sabotage. So I would do
yeah,
like code and a bit of writing,
yeah,
and then he would do level design and some illustrations so that we have placeholder.
yeah,
And then and Miko, who's our environment artist, also started putting in some time.
yeah,
And then Eric, who's our composer, made the one track for the prototype. So it was like four of us basically for a year before Sabotage, before the company
yeah.
existed. Sorry. And then just evenings and weekends and all, and then it kind of made sense. It came together, and then, yeah, in 2016 it was like, okay, we need a company now because we want to look at actually doing this properly,
Yeah.
full time. So yeah, and from there, when the company started, it was just So it was me, it was my buddy Martin who co-founded with me. He was more for the on the side of like, let's try to get this finance. He's more of a
Yeah.
networking
Okay.
kind of
Yeah. On
guy.
the business side of things.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, more of a producer, right? And
Yeah.
and then Sylvain, who's our gameplay coder, so I could stop coding. So yeah, he's like a guy who it's been, so it's been 15 years now that he's always been, whatever project I'm on, he's always there as like the main
So great.
gameplay coder. It's just my go-to guy, and so yeah, he's super good at all that. So I actually stopped coding by then. And yeah, so the first few months was basically we were doing a bit of work for hire with
Hmm.
we're
Oh,
friends
right.
with
You started
the
off with
people
work for
over at
hire. Right. Interesting.
Oddworld. Yeah, yeah.
Good on
Well,
you.
so we got friends with Lauren Lanning, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
creative
Yeah. Yeah.
director from,
Oddworld. Yeah.
so yeah. And so I was very fortunate to actually be able to call him a mentor, in creative direction and everything. I
Yeah.
worked under him and I learned a lot by osmosis. And
Right.
I so he flew me to his studio, and I went there and I was like, man, I'm gonna work super long days, but I just want to be able to pick your brain every night. And he always took me out to dinner and he would just tell me stories, and I just, yeah, he really helped. He kind of validated and helped my sort of my transition, from
Yeah. Yeah.
coder to like, you'll now be directing your own game and everything. So no, I'm super thankful
Fantastic.
for
It is such a
that.
different thing as well. Like, and I think a lot of us find it out the hard way, which is actually like
Mm,
learning in the trenches. But at
yeah.
League of Geeks as well, like we've got a few, a couple tiers
Mm,
of leadership, and
mm,
whether it be game leadership or just team and company leadership, like it's just so different to being in the
mhm.
trenches. Like it's a different job, and so to have someone it's so early on, who's been directing games for so long,
Yeah.
must have been great to give. Do you remember some of the I mean, the podcast is about you and your games, but do you remember some of the
Sure.
lessons that you learned early on, working alongside Lorne that you've taken forward with you, particularly around like game
Right.
direction?
Right. It's very hard to
Pick out just
summarize, I would
like
say.
pick
Yeah.
out single like little
Hmm.
sound bites or something, right?
Because it wouldn't be, they wouldn't be like theoretical sessions. It wouldn't be like,
Yeah,
okay,
of
here's the
course.
thing you want to consider when you're talking to an animator. It was more that, you know what I mean. It
Yeah.
was more like, you just kind of hang out, right? And
Yeah,
then
yeah. You learn
you're
by, like you
just
said, osmosis.
yeah, and you're kind
Yeah.
of like spitballing, and then you have some questions, but it's not that he has like the theoretical framework of what you should do. It's just that he's like, oh yeah, I've seen this like 45,000 times. Here's what happened to Will Wright, when it was the
Yeah,
equivalent. And then you're like, wait, am
yeah,
I getting like a Will Wright story now? Just out of
yeah.
the blue, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So all these moments, they kind of all just compounded, and I was able to sort of map my own way of approaching it, and
Yes,
sort
no,
of
I
really
get it.
taking
Yeah,
from those takeaways. And but I at the end of the day, I think the thing that paid off the most was just watching him interact, right?
yes,
The
yeah,
way he involves people in and so if he's, because obviously also he's a superstar, so that there's that extra layer of
yeah,
but he'll be talking with someone and he can tell the other person is kind of a bit intimidated or whatever
yeah,
in the meeting, not so much wanting to contribute their idea. And he always takes the time, like, hey, by the way, this is a co-creative conversation. I want to hear
yeah,
what you think. I want to hear
yeah.
how you feel.
Great, raising up
And
those
just
voices in the
this,
room. Yeah,
always leveling with people, right?
yeah,
Always kind of keeping it at a very humane level, keeping it always like super fair that everyone feels involved, but in a very, very genuine way. He's
yeah,
patient. And sometimes he's just looking at something on his screen, watching a video on a loop, and he's just laughing. And it's like, I don't know what's happening there. And then like an hour later, he comes to
yeah,
you and he's like, man, we need better explosions. Come look at this. Like, you see how the smoke, and it's like, okay, his brain just kind of got stuck on a fine
yeah,
detail that he wants to kind of extract and re-express. And I would say that was kind of validating, right? Because
yeah.
I would feel like if I'm just in love with a gift for no reason, I feel like I'm wasting my time. But it's like, no, actually, you're
The
in the
inspiration comes from
process
different
of,
paces, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And so it was just a whole lot of kind of like, no, just embrace, like, just don't put too much of a frame
yeah,
around it, but just follow the thing that you kind of already know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
just allow it to emerge. Maybe not as
yeah,
far as the sculpture is already on the rock and you're just removing the, but
yeah,
almost. I could tell that it's not that he always had a plan, but he always planned, here's what we're going to start exploring
yeah.
together.
And then you plan for happy
And
accidents, right?
yeah, and
Yeah,
trusting the process and working in iteration,
mhm,
and we will end up in a place that we all like to gather around something and be like, this is really great.
yeah,
because what happened is that people who were genuinely driven to pursue it kept going until
Yeah.
they heard the sound that they were looking for, so just
Yeah.
embracing this letting it take time, and not being ready until it's ready, kind of this that look for quality, for polish, for
Yeah.
something unique. No, it was, yeah.
Well, let's talk about that in relation to the messenger, because
Hmm.
just so you're doing actually let's take a step back. So you're saying you're doing client work. What was the break? Because we have people on usually when you walk onto this podcast, right, it's for a couple of reasons. It's because you've had a generally all three, right, critically, culturally, commercially successful game, which
Mm,
you've just had. Or it could be one, usually one or two of the others, right? But when
mm,
people come on here, it's actually amazing how many of them haven't just gone through the studio system or something like
mm,
that, but especially the indies have done work for hire stuff before.
mm, right.
And I remember there's, one of them was talking about escape velocity as a thing, because work for hire can also be a kind of quicksand. So talk to me
Mm,
about how you manage that, with your business partner or your producer, a
mm.
friend who was doing the, is it Martin that was doing the production
Yeah, yeah,
stuff? Yeah, right. With you and
yeah.
Martin, how did you ensure that the work for hire actually led to the messenger as opposed to getting bogged down in that?
Oh, okay, right, right. So here's the thing: is the work for hire bit. And again, that's where, anyone has a different path, and I just leverage what I happen to have.
Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah.
my thing was, I became a consultant,
Hmm.
because I was by then sort of a senior gameplay programmer, and I
Yeah.
had I had
Right.
been leading teams for years.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I would go on projects that had kind of problems or whatever, and I'd be like, okay, let me look at this, let's see, let me talk to the team, let's implement a better pipeline or whatever, and let's talk about the results, and I'll be following up or whatever. And so by doing consultancy work like that, it's a higher wage per hour than
Yeah.
if
Of
you're just kind
course.
of working on a long production. So that's kind of how I was able to bootstrap. Is that for a few months I was doing that just to
Right.
get
Yeah.
in as much money as I could, so that
Just
I could
stack
then,
cash so you could pay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Of
And
course.
then
Yeah.
it's like we start a company, and we don't have to pay anyone for like 6 months or whatever, because we have the stack, that we can
Yeah.
use.
That's great.
And so that kind of solved. That was the way that I was able to kind of bootstrap or hack my way into running my own thing.
Yeah.
In terms of what Martin was working on, was more. We have the CMF, which is the Canada Media
Yeah.
Fund.
Yeah. It's
I
amazing.
know people know that in the industry that there's kind of bags of money flying around a little bit in Canada, and so we're very fortunate for that. Is we have
Yes.
culture funds where
Yeah.
you can basically go like, hey, like this is us. This is our idea. This is the
Hmm.
market that we see for it. This is the prototype we have so far. Can we have this amount? And then they have an envelope every year, and they kind of rank your project, and then they either it's either they give it to you or they don't. And so we were
Right.
able to. That's what he worked on, and so we got funding that allowed us to transition full time. In terms of work
That's
for
incredible.
hire, what we did is that when I was a consultant, the last sort of client that I had was actually Lorne. I got on the Oddworld project
Oh, right.
through
Okay.
that
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
consulting.
Consulting. Yeah.
And so when I transitioned over to founding Sabotage, it was like, hey, do you guys want to keep going for a little bit, like as you figure it out? And so from the get go, it was understood, right, that
Yeah.
that the end goal was to eventually do Messenger, and they're the only client, quote unquote, right, we ever had. It wasn't like a typical, I would
Yeah.
say.
Got you. Yeah. I got
It's not like we're pitching the studio trying to sign something for a few months. It was just like,
Yeah.
no, we have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
very friendly and a very thorough
Yeah.
understanding of one another relationship with them. So that's
Yeah.
that's all we did to
You're
be to
not
be
hitting the
fully
local
clear.
mall with Sabotage Services business cards or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So now let's look at the messenger, because I mean, you all just exploded onto the scene with that game. It was really crazy.
Mm.
So, tell me, just so we can sort of get a little our heads around, and our listeners can get our heads around this project. Just give me a couple of quick facts, like how long did you spend in development, and sort of what was the team size around the
Hmm.
messenger?
Sure. So team size, if we're talking about not the studio, but the people actually like
Yeah,
touching
yeah,
the
for sure.
game,
Yeah,
so it was 6 people.
yeah. Yep.
6 people worked on the production. So Sylvain was the only coder. I still did a little. I coded a few bosses, but he really did like 95% of it.
Yeah.
Then we had a level designer. I was doing game design and writing. We had two animators, one level artist, and a musician. So maybe that's
Yeah.
seven actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so that's the entire team.
Mhm.
So we started. So we had some groundwork done during the first year, but
Yeah,
when it was
your
just a
Flash
prototype,
prototype, right?
we had to,
It's
yeah. but
like
even but even from the year like before founding Sabotage, which it
yeah.
was in Unity, the prototype that we were doing,
Mhm.
that thing was we didn't really keep anything. Like I coded it, and Sylvain wanted to kind of do it properly and cleanly, so it was extensible and all. So
Rude.
we
That's
kind of
very. Were you insulted?
oh, not at all, no, no, no. We've been the best of friends for over
No,
a
that's
decade
fair.
at that point. So it's like yeah, sure. I know where my strengths are, and they are not in coding. I'm kind of done with that anyway. So, uh, but yeah, and so we kind of redid all of that, and just getting the tool set together, and what really sucked is our or a challenge we had was our level designer Phil. He's like
Mm.
the guy has like triple A experience. He was on the original Assassin's Creed. He worked on Prince of Persia, Warrior
Yeah,
Within.
cool.
When I first met this guy, I was like starstruck, right? And so, but then we became fast friends, and he so he's the guy I worked with on the prototype for a year before Sabotage. But when it became real,
Yeah,
he was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was fun, but I can't afford to, I have a son,
continue. Yeah,
I am in the director position at this
yeah.
stable place. I'm like, oh man, I get it, but and we kind of pulled a little trick where we developed all the tools for level design, which mostly went through a plugin. Actually, it wasn't, I don't want to paint it as that big of a deal. But once we had all the tools set together for the production, we asked him to take a day off to come and try the tools to give us feedback.
The honey pot. I love it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and he actually went like, "Oh man, this is amazing! I want to do a production using that." So I'm in. It was like, yes.
We
So
get,
it's like,
ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So it worked, and yeah, I mean, and we still work together to this day, and then everyone's super happy about
that's
that. But yeah,
fantastic.
and so yeah, so we locked him in at last. Um, and yeah,
Great.
so from then we were working with Oddworld 4 days a week, and then
Yeah,
on Friday was Messenger,
I
and
love
then
it. That's great. Messenger
yeah,
Day. That's cool. Yeah.
absolutely, we were all always like super excited, and
It's like a
then so
little
yeah, then we
treat
got
as
the
well. I love that it's Friday because it's like a little treat at the end of the week as well.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we had to earn it, also every week. It's like we need to finish, our homework, our homework for hire,
Yeah, no dessert until
Uh,
you've done your homework. Yeah,
exactly. Uh, and so yeah, and then we got the CMF funding early 2017.
that's awesome.
So early 2017, and basically I remember I was actually at GDC, so it was probably like in March or February or something,
Yeah.
and it was like, okay, well, now we're all in, so we're actually hiring. Everyone was just waiting for us to kind of have the funds, and then
Hmm.
the team got together, and then yeah, we were in production from around March 2017, like actually full time,
Yep.
all the way to around July 2018.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
would say about like maybe what, a year and a half or
That's
something.
actually incredible. I mean, I know that you've been working on it ahead of
Yeah.
time and everything like that, but
Mm,
that's incredibly fast as well. Like,
yeah.
um, so actually, let's pause here for a second because we obviously people listen to this podcast not just because they're fans of the games, but because they're fans of game developers and conversations between game
Mm,
developers.
of course.
So I think the first thing to note is that, like, as I sort of hinted at, or made a little passing gag at both of our expense at the start of the podcast. Terry here works on games that are very much retro inspired.
Mm,
And the pixel art aesthetic, absolutely. Sea of Stars is a stunning game as well.
mm.
And so maybe why don't you tell folks about the Messenger and what Messenger is? Give us. I know it's probably been 10 years, maybe, or what, like 6 years since you've given the elevator pitch, but give our
Yeah.
listeners the elevator pitch for the Messenger.
Sure. Yeah, it's been about 6 years. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, the elevator pitch is so it's a side-scrolling action platformer where you play a ninja, and it takes place it's in a post-apocalyptic world where there's been a flood and there's only the one island left, and then that island got cursed. And so you're the messenger, you're given a scroll, and you basically have to carry that scroll across the island. So it's presented as a linear 8-bit action platformer, but then eventually, later in the game, you go into the future, which is supported by a shift to 16-bit graphics, and then you realize it was all a loop, and then eventually the frame falls, and you realize you had been playing the linear portion of a Metroidvania all along, and then you get a map, and then the second portion of the game is now a Metroidvania, and you need to finish kind of mapping everything.
I love it. It's so good. It's like if Inception was like an 80s 16-bit ninja game. And like folks, I've got to say as well, like if you're sitting at your PC listening to this podcast or you're on your phone, bring up The Messenger, bring up Sea of Stars. These games could literally be from the 90s as well. And I think this is one of the most amazing things about the work that you and your team do, Terry, is
Mm,
it's not just a pixel art aesthetic inspired by the past. You go to such great lengths even in the type and the type setting to the UI, like to the
mm,
actual game structure as well. Like something that really strikes me about Sea of
mm.
Stars is like find myself swearing at the screen when like my whole party goes down and like I'm however like 20 minutes back on a save point or something. But like
Right.
that's the purity of the experience that you're actually
Mm,
emulating is a really great
mm,
word because it does feel like I'm kind of playing these games through an emulator in some sense from the 80s. So talk
right.
to me about that is because obviously it's here in the messenger. It's not something that just came about in Sea of Stars. It's very
Hmm.
clear that that was an objective of you and your team.
Hmm.
Talk to me about that and capturing that, essence of these games like so
Yeah.
in such a pure fashion.
Absolutely. I mean, so the thing for me is we wanted to make the sort of the vision, right, for Sabotage was we're going to have like retro aesthetics, so like
Yeah.
audio and visuals, like the things clicking will kind of compel your inner child. If you grew up
Yeah.
playing the same games we did,
Yeah.
you're going to feel like, oh, I understand this language. But then we want to modernize the game design aspect of it, so the way the pacing of the story, the controls, that because what we miss is being nine, right? We don't miss the stiff controls, we don't miss the repetitive music, we don't miss the
Yeah.
unfair difficulty spikes.
Yeah.
What we really miss is something else, is the magic, is the glasses we had on top of what we were playing. And
Yeah.
so, sort of what we're setting out to do is we want something that the way it looks and feels, it opens up that part of your brain and invites it to be the one playing.
Mm.
And then we want to present a game that's modernized in a way that it will then be as good as your memory of those games,
Yeah.
which our memories of those games are games that don't actually exist. And
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to make, something that plays like smoothly, right? And the story
Yeah.
keeps on going. The difficulty is fair. The controls feel good. But everything, the way it clicks and the way it sounds feels like we don't want to cut that thread with your childhood, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why we're also changing genres with every game, because our journey is complete. We're presenting our definitive edition
Yeah.
of a genre that always stayed with us. And because I'm a
That's
gigantic
so
fan of
interesting.
Ninja Gaiden, of course,
Yeah.
with looking at
Yeah.
which, in case that wasn't obvious, with Messenger, and but looking at Ninja Gaiden, it's like, oh man, how do we make something that's as good as how I feel about this game?
Yeah.
And that isn't like fully there for like you know archaic technical reasons most of the
Yeah.
time.
It's so true
Uh,
as well. Like the Nintendo, I forget what it's called, but like the
mm,
actual what do you call it? The package that you can purchase. It gives you the retro games, like the subscription. But I
oh
remember
yeah.
when that came out on Switch and they added Ninja Gaiden to it. I was like, oh, sick, because I played that as a kid too. And I
Mm,
booted it up, and I was
mm,
like you were saying, like my memory of the game looked like the messenger and felt like the messenger, but it was
mm.
very much not how the game played. And when talk about
Right.
difficulty spikes, the difficulty
Mm.
spike happens about 4 seconds into that game.
Oh
I
yeah.
was like, literally, 10-year-old
Mm,
old me was a
mm.
hundred times better at that game than 35-year-old me at the
Oh, for
time.
sure.
So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I think it's such a, and also playing Sea of Stars because my partner sat down last night when I had the game fired up and she's like, "Oh, what are you
Mm,
playing? This looks cool." And I was just explaining to her, I guess you're without even talking to you now, what I assumed was your mission, which is what you're saying. And I
mm,
mentioned the same thing. I was like, it kind of feels like how I remember a Super Nintendo game playing. It's like a Super
mm,
Nintendo game that didn't exist then, but I've like, you've dusted it off
mm.
and you're playing it now.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, so the thing too is, you look at something like Messenger. Obviously, it would never run on a NES, right?
Yes.
Because it's doing a whole bunch of illegal things, right? In terms of from a technical standpoint. But we always made a point, like, and that's why the journey, like the in designing the game, that's why the journey was so fun for us.
Yeah.
That's why we had so much fun on the production floor.
Yeah.
Was how do we like prune like the things that didn't age well, we're going to do away with them, or we're going to rethink them. You
Yeah.
think of something like a character like Quarble, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, that's a very interesting, at least in my opinion, it's an interesting solve. It was a fun like journey to kind of arrive at something like, how do we have a way to sort of build the world even more, have some comic relief, but also mainly have a mechanic for you dying, which lives and continues. That doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
We can't
Yeah.
have that today. That was like a remnant of like putting coins in a machine that they hadn't figured out yet.
Yes. Yep.
And
Yep.
so how do we have something where there's still a penalty for dying? Okay, so Corbel is going to eat your money for a little while and then
Yeah.
leave. So you feel like you're paying something, but you don't want to see lives and continues anymore. We're not
Yeah.
doing a thing with only 9 levels that will still take you forever because they're too hard. It's a
Yeah.
full scope. It's a full
Yeah.
scope game. So bringing in those mechanic, and that's an example for me of like modernizing. It's like we
Yes.
still need
Yeah.
a penalty for dying, but we want to do it in a way that makes sense today
Yeah.
without taking away from the retro that could have been, if you will. And
Yeah.
then things like, well, do we want to implement like blinking on the sprites when there's more than like three on the same scan line? It's like, yeah, we probably don't need that.
Yeah.
But then
Gotcha.
we're still going to make a point. Not There's no moment in Messenger where you see more than maybe 6 enemies on the screen, right?
Yeah.
And which we could have done something where we can't afford to have 27 now.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, we're still going to limit ourselves to, even though we're not going to make them blink, we're still going to pay homage to, there
Yeah.
were some technical reasons why the number
Yeah.
was limited, and that allowed for a certain type of rhythm in the gameplay
Yeah.
that speaks to the essence, like that simplicity of like getting to the point with your idea, the same way that the music doesn't drag its intro for like 2 minutes with like a
Yeah.
synthetic orchestra. It's like, no, get to the hook, because you
Yeah.
have a very short loop. You don't
Yeah.
have to do a short loop nowadays, but
Yeah.
we still made a point to do it so that we would sort of capture this kind of like the crispness, and everything.
The interesting thing about you saying that, Terry, excuse me, is that you were a kid when you were playing these games. So
Mm.
how did you even know? How did you go up? Was there a process of learning that when there's three characters on the same scan line that the sprites blink, or that the
Mm.
NES couldn't handle any more than 6 characters on screen? Like these types of technical, because I am super into these kinds of design decisions, right? Like, have you played Signalis at all? You
Not enough to comment on it,
Right.
but
Okay. So Signalis,
I will.
very interesting game. Like obviously, like it's like a PlayStation 1 sort of
Hmm.
PlayStation 2 sort of era graphics survival horror game. Amazing,
Hmm.
amazing game. But one of the things that I love is when they pick and choose to sort of cheat the aesthetic. Like that
Yeah.
you punch in on something and the graphics are not what would be delivered on a PlayStation 2, but in that moment the game needs it. And so this is the exact same kind of thing that you're doing, right, on your games of
Mm.
Messenger and Sea of Stars. But to
Mhm.
even understand what those technical restraints were at the time to actually have that authenticity, like you need to know them, right? And like as I
Yeah.
said, you're a kid playing these games. You weren't
Mhm.
programming
Mhm.
on the NES when it happened.
Mhm.
So was there a period of discovery, or how did you go about learning these things? Is it just kind of urban legend, or that
Yeah,
down
yeah.
through game
Right.
developer to game developer?
It's a lot of like, well, so one thing is I was also an adult when I played these games. I mean, I still have an extensive retro
Oh,
collection,
right.
and
Yeah, of course. You're
I
still playing them.
play,
Yeah,
yeah,
true.
yeah, I'm video games through and through, and so, and I still play retro games as much as I play modern
Yeah,
ones or any
wow.
things that come out. And I there are some games that I don't know, like games like Donkey Kong Country 2. It's like I'll never stop playing that. I'll never not want to beat that game
Yeah,
once every 2 months, like for some reason. And when you keep playing them, you become familiar on a different level, and you start
yes,
noticing
yeah,
little
yeah.
details. Yeah. And there was also the whole like being a gameplay coder thing. You get interested in some blogs that talk about things like that. And it's like, oh, did you know that the random in the chest in Super Mario Brothers 3 is actually determined before you open it? And so no matter which one you pick or whatever, it doesn't change. And you're like, oh, really? And then here's a code review of all of that, and then you read through that. And there was
Yeah,
kind of like
okay.
this interest was kind of always there, and understanding how these games were being made.
Yeah,
Even did a tiny bit of assembly coding to try to get like Zelda 2 Link's sprite to kind of like side scroll on an NES the way that's actually implemented, which is super
wow.
intricate. Just getting something to scroll takes forever, but it's interesting to kind of understand a bit more of the metricity of those things, because
Yeah,
then you feel like in some way you can kind of maybe convey uh, uh, like some under the hood ways of how it behaved that is kind of consistent with something that no one knows, but they can instinctively understand or feel from one game to another, you know.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
at least we try to, but yeah.
Do you remember some of the things that before, because obviously I imagine some of these come along during discussion, you come to a decision path in the game, and you're like, oh,
Mm,
that's that's modernizing it too much, or that's, that's too, like you were saying with the blinking and the scan lines, we don't need that. That's too
yeah.
much. Do you remember some of the things that you started with that you knew you had to do? Obviously, like the graphics rules around 16-bit or whatever, but like
Yeah.
what were some of the more interesting ones that you can remember started, like the constraints that you set on yourselves
Mm.
to retain that authenticity? Do you remember some that you had coming out of the gate?
Right. Well, we didn't really so we knew for sure that in terms of level design, one rule would be that we mainly want a section to either scroll only on the X axis or the Y axis, and we would very rarely use like both of them. Sometimes because
Right.
we want to
Okay.
reserve that for, oh, this area feels like super open. It's kind of like freeing in contrast to that. There were
Yeah.
a few things like that. There were also, because obviously, as you know, we start by establishing kind of like pillars and like more
Yeah.
abstract feelings we want to speak to and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of that, it was we wanted to design everything per screen, like
Yeah.
no filler in any of the levels. Everything should be, I should always be seeing something that's like my target, the thing I attempt, that I can fail at or succeed at, and then I move on to another set piece. So everything is a set piece.
Yeah.
We also wanted to only do things once and then move on. So like we're not, which is maybe breaking the retro rules a little bit. There's very little reuse, right? It's like we did the catacombs, and like you're not gonna see that same like floating platform in the forest later. It's been used, it's
Interesting.
bespoke to
Okay.
that area. We want to present these kind of like something I always say is every area, that's true in Sea of Stars as well, is every area is a snow globe.
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
and I felt that in Sea of Stars as well. I
So,
actually,
oh,
when I
cool.
got to like the third
Mm,
area or something in Sea of
mm.
Stars, I was like, Jesus Christ, there's so much art in this game. Yeah,
Right. Exactly. So these like super self-contained but like fully developed things, and we let them just stand on their own,
yeah,
and sort of like the exposure time they will get through how many people play it, and also through how many people care to replay it
yeah,
if there was no like tedious bit. When you have, that was another thing we had, like when there were only like 5 guidelines to the game. It's
yeah,
like no bit that makes you go, I'm never playing that again. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like
Okay,
no, like
gotcha.
this
Yeah,
labyrinth that's super annoying that maybe makes sense the
yeah,
first time around, but then you just make a mental note like, this felt like a task.
yeah, yeah. Gotcha.
um
Yeah,
yeah. So no, but then in terms of keeping it retro, I think really what it is we just kind of, we hold that frequency, and we just, whenever we're looking at something, we're
yeah,
briefing for a feature or reviewing an asset that was made.
yeah,
It's kind of just interrogating, like, is that threatening, like the
yeah,
the kind of like the thin line that I feel that's connecting me, the string that's connecting me to my inner child, if you will, that
yes, yeah,
remembers
yeah,
retro game, and it needs to elevate it all the time.
yep,
And so there are a lot of things that we did. It's like, well, yeah, that looks technically in its own, like with blinders on, that looks
hmm,
prettier, right? Just from an
yeah,
art perspective or whatever. But it's taking a jab at the retro feel of the game. And so we were very mindful. It wasn't very well defined, but we were aware of there's some kind of budget. We can modernize a little bit. We can do things that retro games couldn't do. But
yeah,
if we do it too much, it's going to reach a breaking point where you lose that retro immersion. So
yeah,
we're trying to be like, hit the wall, take a step back. We know we went all the way, basically, kind of.
yeah. I love it. It's so good as well. Siobhan Reddy, head of Media Molecule, fantastic, you know, the producer as well.
Mm,
I remember her saying something on a podcast once that was, she was asked the difference between people who like can ship a game and people who can't, like producers that can ship and producers that struggle. And she spoke
mm,
about this point where video games are all in our heads, whether you're working on a team with 5 or you're working a team with, 100 or 250.
mm,
When you're starting work on a video game, it's in everyone's heads, like, and
yeah,
that video game looks different. It might, even if everyone's aligned, it still looks slightly different to everyone, right? Because they're imagining different things. You can
yeah,
explain it as much as you want, but it's still in their heads. And she
mm,
said, the point that you want to get to the fastest, where everything changes to the biggest inflection point. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, and embellishing a little bit because you said it many years ago, and I've really taken it to heart. Is when the game is no longer in everyone's heads and it's on one screen that all of you are looking at together.
Mm.
And you then can talk objectively about what is on screen and you can discuss it together because it's no longer just an idea in everyone's heads. It's slightly different, right? And it makes the communication process so much. You said the importance of getting to that so quickly. The reason why I bring that up is because this razor that you're talking about having, this retro aesthetic there that, all of us have grown up playing, if you're our age, right? It provides a very clear razor when you do have that game on screen, right? It's a really interesting and amazing tool. I can imagine like things must have moved pretty smoothly once you've got the game prototyped in that retro aesthetic. Did you find that razor was pretty easy to interrogate? Were folks able to be on the same page about like, yeah, this does feel retro or this doesn't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I very much like, and you're right. Like from the when you work on the game, it's just assets and an engine for a very long time, right? And you're like, is it ever going to feel to me like it's
Yeah.
seamless, like it's now a thing that's whole, and that
Yeah.
I can actually, am I gonna stop feeling like that's just an asset in an
Yeah.
engine, and polish takes you there. And what I remember just real quick that what Lauren used to say, I feel in the same vein of the thing you mentioned, Siobhan, saying is, uh, he said, because I was working with him on a prototyping a gameplay, and he said it doesn't sing yet. And he kind of seemed to, it's my understanding, I don't speak
Yeah,
for
of
him, but
course.
my
Yeah.
understanding was, it was as if he was saying like, look, there's a limit to how much we can talk about it, we just need to keep implementing until it speaks for itself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and
No,
and
it's the
but I
exact
think,
same thing. Yeah.
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 And so, and you do reach that point at some point, like, so for a while it's just we're just we're just chopping trees down,
Yeah.
and eventually there's this thing that speaks for itself, and
Yeah.
everyone sees it, and now it's like, okay, now instead of like moving away from where it's not, we can move toward where it's at, because
Yeah.
now we all see it. And then people start contributing ideas, but it's not all abstract stuff that you're like, yeah, we could do something different, but we're still trying to look for the thing we felt very abstract from the initial pitch. But yeah, the first time you hear that ping as you're like digging, that's
I
when you're
love
like,
it.
okay,
It's a
we
great
all,
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, now we can all sort of interrogate it, we can all look at
Yeah.
it, and we can all get invested, like, oh, but
Yeah.
what if I do this? Yeah, I agree, but I think it's better presented like in this, from this
Yeah.
angle. What do you think? It's like, oh yeah, I agree, oh, let me try something. Okay, but there reaches a point where we're, as you said, we're all talking about the same thing now, and we're
Yeah.
all like moving towards. So yeah, that's when at least in our production, that's where everything kicks into kind of overdrive, because now everyone sees it, so
Yeah. Do
there's
you
a lot
remember
less
that point for
questions.
you?
And
Did that come early in the process with this game, or did it come much later? Because I know even genre, for example, we work in strategy, and that
mm,
point doesn't come until like beta. It's
mm.
torturous. But
Oh yeah.
in some games, where you can get a really tight
Mm,
vertical slice because the verticality of your game is
yeah.
quite low.
Hmm.
It can happen very early on. When do you remember that moment when you sort of struck iron, so to speak, with your shovel?
Yeah, for Messenger, it came pretty fast, because we just
Mm.
had the little cloud step mechanic where it's like there's no double jump, but if you hit something in the air, it resets your jump, and it's kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay, is that like a unique mechanic that carries the whole thing? And we kind of did a gym of like, let's do 100 screens using that idea. And it's like, okay, cool, it does carry the game. So we
yeah,
moved on to vertical slice really fast, because we knew, how as long as there's water, there's sauce, right? But we knew that this mechanic was actually enough to carry the entire game,
yeah,
or we felt confident that it was, I should say.
yeah.
And so we moved on to vertical slice really fast, actually, and we just did the first level of the game, and we took it all the way to like final.
Wow.
And so yeah, right there we felt it. We did some play tests and everything, and but the big click moment though, because back then we were still just a group of friends who, by all accounts, were only going to sell 22 copies, right? Because you don't know, right? Everyone who
Yeah, of
sets out
course.
to do
Yeah.
this believes
You're
in
also
their thing
making
and
like a retro
understands.
a retro
Yeah.
ninja game. Like
Oh
you
man,
don't know the marketability of that. Like obviously
that's
high, we found out since, but
mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah,
totally get
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. No, there was a lot of like, yeah, we've heard that before, and I was like, yeah, but then, we've heard zombies before, yet here we are with another one. And like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's
Yeah.
fair. I don't feel like Ninja is the one that's been overdone, but anyway,
Yeah.
and so no, but which my counter to that, by the way, just quick parentheses here,
No, I
is
love
like
it. Yeah.
when people were saying like there's too many Ninja games, I was like, I bet like if I remove Tenshu, I don't think you can name a single Ninja game where the Ninja is like in
Dude,
context.
it's so funny that you say this because I've been going on a rant recently
Mm,
about how there aren't enough ninja games, like, or
right.
even ninja, like that ninja media. Obviously, you and I
Mm,
in our
mm.
childhood bombarded with ninjas,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Ninjas
absolutely.
peaked in the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah.
Everything had a ninja, but
Mm,
they've dropped off to a point where you're doing the Lord's work. Like the messenger,
mm,
you're actually doing the heavy lifting at the moment. We need
mm.
ninjas to come back. I actually,
Right.
so sidebar for a second, it's funny you mentioned Tenchu, just because recently in
Yeah.
October, just last month, I had dinner with Takuma Endo,
Mm,
the creator of
okay.
Tenchu.
Mm,
And
wow.
I had a conversation with him at PAX Australia about it and everything. I was telling him the same thing. I was like,
Mm.
dude, we need to get you back. We've got to
Yeah.
dust off the tools. Like we need ninja games. So I'm
Oh
out
yeah.
there pitching, like I believe you.
Awesome.
And don't get me started on zombie stuff as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing the like the miles that has in the tank zombies for some reason.
Mm.
But yeah,
Oh
so
yeah.
but you were saying, sorry, you said there was a real inflection point as well, another one too, that
Oh
you
yeah.
were
Yeah.
pointing towards.
Well, there was also the moment where the shovel made sound, which was like it might meet an audience, right? And that was at
Right.
PAX East, where we just had a booth, right?
Yeah.
And someone was playing, and I just seeing the face on the person
Right. Yeah.
playing, and like it's kind of like the music swelled while they were dodging like a stumper trying to,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh man,
They're
the
having
game
a moment.
is like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's actually a complete game. Like someone is playing a video game right now that we
Yeah.
made, and they don't see any of the seams. They don't feel like it's assets in an engine.
Yeah.
They're fully dialed in. And so yeah, that was kind of that was a big moment.
Yeah.
Seeing that it actually comes across.
There's something in the indie experience that I think, unfortunately, like AAA developers are robbed of, and that is
Mm.
the experience of showcasing your game at different events. Like
Oh yeah.
PAX over the years, I always say when I come back to the team in Melbourne and I've been over at PAX West or a Bit Summit or whatever,
Mm.
showing off the game, like I always say to them, like, I wish you were there, and like
Mm.
often some of them are, like a lot, we've taken a bunch of crew overseas, and showing off the game and stuff. But I remember
Yeah.
in the early days of Armello, the first
Mm.
time we showed it at PAX Australia in 2013, that moment that you're talking about where people are playing this thing that's pre-release and you're in the like the Mariana Trench of darkness of like game development,
Oh
and
yeah.
you come up to the surface to show someone your game, and they have that
Mm.
moment that you're talking about where
Mm.
you're like, holy shit, we are making a video
Yeah.
game and this person appreciates it.
Mm.
The fuel that you can run off from those experiences is
Mm.
just, it's amazing. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's soul food for sure.
It's so special, yeah. It's really, really something else because you're aware of all like the little, faults that your thing has, and you're worried about like performance and this or that level, and then you're wondering if this other idea is gonna pan out. And it's like, no, here's just a short distill of someone just like taking it in
Yeah,
and
this is
like
what really matters,
actually
right?
enjoying it. Yeah, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, that's why you do it. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, it's a perfect segue into the partner that you brought on for the Messenger. We're talking about, the game at PAX and showing things and
Mm,
everything. The Messenger, published by Devolver Digital. Tell me how Devolver
mm.
came onto the scene and how that partnership came about.
We had the our a very early believer for us was Kirk Scott from Nintendo of America back in the
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
He was
Okay.
Nindy account manager, and so I mean, obviously, Kirk was a tremendous account manager and an absolute treat.
Mm.
And so yeah, and basically he showing him the game, and I think it was at GEC 2017 probably for the first time, and he said, "Okay, I hear you. It's very early, but I hear you. Uh, it sounds like it's a lot of work to take home in the what small time you have here.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it sounds really cool because I was telling the whole thing, and we only had the one level, only an 8-bit, with no upgrades on the character
And
and
you're
all.
telling them about the go into the
And I was
future and the
like, yeah,
universe and
yeah,
film Metroidvania
yeah.
and
I was like, next year there's time travel, yeah. And
yeah.
so and he was like, "Look, it sounds amazing." And then, so the next year we're at it's. Oh, actually, no, it was still in 2017, late in the year at MIGS, right in Montreal,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it was
yeah,
in
yeah.
November. So we meet again, and I'm like, "Can I show you like where we're at?" And he was basically like, "I can't believe how much progress you
Yeah,
made on
he's
this.
like,
You're
oh,
actually gonna."
they're doing it.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Yeah.
It was like, okay, so you're actually delivering what you said you would. So now it's a different
Yeah.
conversation. And basically, so we saw him again at so it was PAX South. So
Yeah.
yeah, January I think of
Yeah. Yeah.
2018
Cool. Yeah.
in San Antonio. I think that's over now, but yeah. And so we were there, and it's like, looking for a publisher. We're considering speaking to a few of them, not sure, blah blah. And he goes, "Why not Devolver?" And it's like, well, I mean, no shit, right? Like it's like how, I mean,
Yeah.
of course. And
Yeah.
and he said, no, I think they just need to see the game. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, I don't know how to do this. And he said, well, I'll bring them over. We had a very small booth.
Yeah.
Uh, but we were next to the Cyanide and Happiness comic,
Oh,
so people were like kind of coming over, because of that, and we just had our own TV,
yeah.
that we flew and all. It's like, ugh. But and so it was Nigel, who I'm sure you know from
Yeah, I know.
Devolver,
Nigel Lowry, yep.
and I was kind of like, oof, okay, this is it. And so I gave the pitch, and he had a complete like blank face, and I was like, he's just being professional. I don't know, maybe he probably
Yeah.
hates it, whatever. And I gave the whole pitch. I explained the like looping around. You come back to the beginning of the game, but in the future, and then the frame
Yeah.
falls and all. And he said he had this weird, like, he always crosses his leg and like his feet are like sideways on the floor. How does he
Yeah.
do it? Trying to pitch while like, yeah. And then and then he says, "Would you mind pitching to the whole team?" And I said, "No, I'm happy to do it." And he sent like whoever they happened to have, at the event. Or I know JM was there, JR was there, so a whole bunch of Devolver crew.
Yeah.
And I did the whole pitch, and they applauded, and I was like, "Oh wow, no way!" I was like, "No way!"
A
And
publisher applauding you after you
and he
pitched the
said,
game. Holy shit.
but it was on the floor, at PAX too, which is
Yeah.
like so weird. And then he, because we had done, I was new to this, but we had met a few publishers in like meeting rooms and like trying to
Yeah.
look at maybe a sort of a deal. And then he just said like, we want it. And I was like, okay, but like, like, you don't even know what we need, you don't even have like a timeline. He's like, eh.
He's like, no, no, no. I think you didn't
Yeah.
hear me. We want
So
it.
yeah, so he was basically like, and seeing that was like, yeah, that's the way that we are, as Sabotage, kind of like no management, and like we're just trusting people to kind of put their best foot forward every
Yeah.
day, and they're genuinely driven, and we don't
Yeah.
manage like you weren't here yesterday. It's like, no, we all want to deliver something cool. If you need time, just take it. This kind of like less, this more candid way of doing
Yeah.
things was
Yeah.
a great fit with Devolver as well,
Yeah.
which for them was like, look, we're excited about the game. Well, the rest is just formalities that we'll just figure out. And they
Yeah.
basically said yes to everything we needed and wanted. The deal was actually fair. It wasn't like an attempt to start a negotiation where they know there's gonna be some give. It was like, no, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's just
Yeah.
do it. And it was an amazing relationship.
Yeah, they're fantastic operators, Devolver. They're awesome. And the thing,
Yeah.
it's funny that you talk about PAX South because PAX
Mm,
South San Antonio, was such a
mm,
special thing. But for me personally, I think one of the special things about PAX South was Devolver because a bunch of
mm.
them are from Texas. So it was
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like their PAX. And then they had that Devolver hotel, where they would like
Mm,
shack up all their devs in this crazy
yeah.
little boutique hotel and
Mm,
cook them breakfast. We they were kind enough as well to like give us a room in there at one point for PAX
mm.
South as we're mates with them as well. It was such a great vibe, PAX South.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I really enjoyed it. It was a really cool PAX.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was fun.
All right, well, Messenger, amazing. Like folks, if you haven't played the Messenger, really, especially if you like for any reason enjoyed Ninja Gaiden, or you feel strongly like Terry and I do that there should be more ninjas in media today, absolutely check out the Messenger. But let's talk about what came after that. And I mean, immediately after Terry. So you released the game, and obviously, I mean, it's still sitting on very positive. It's like not 93% or something on Steam.
Mm,
Obviously, it sold quite well. It really like just threw your studio onto the
mm,
scene, and especially with
mm.
Devolver's help and little stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Talk to me about release and those moments immediately after release. And forgive me as well, I can't remember if you supported the game at all afterwards or whether you just sort of put a bow on it and moved on
Oh
to
yeah.
your
We
stars.
so
Yeah.
we did a DLC that came out about a year after that.
Great.
Yeah, the way, and that's just a quick aside maybe, but like the way I look at dev cycles
Yeah.
is obviously we don't want to just fire people in between projects, right?
That would be
But
nice. Yeah.
also
Yeah.
yeah, but also well, I mean, it's something we see a lot, right? But also you need a smaller team to prototype to get to work on the next big idea. You
Yes.
can't
Yeah.
just move everyone, at least we can't.
Yeah.
And so what I love about DLC is that it's kind of a known quantity of a pipeline. And
Yeah.
so just everyone, it's not so much a business case for us, meaning like this will be good for the bottom line if we make a DLC. It's like, what a great way to kind of just do a bit of a wacky like Christmas special within our game to celebrate that it worked out.
Yeah.
It keeps everyone busy while we do the groundwork for the next game, and then we kind of transition in that way. So basically that's what we did is we had a kind of a summit, like an offsite thing for a week, where I pitched DLC for Messenger, like right after a month after release.
Yeah.
So first I played Spider-Man. That's the first thing that happened, but because it was just
Very
coming out.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, which I got to do again with Spider-Man 2 now.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
we
Thank you,
we launch a
Insomniac.
game, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why we need to make a third game, right? So
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
there's a Spider-Man that can release right after.
I'm excited to play Spider-Man 3, so you do need to get to work
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that third game.
Absolutely. And so yeah, so at the summit it was basically here's a pitch for DLC, here's a pitch for Sea of Stars, and basically the studio was kind of like split into okay, some people just they work on DLC, some people do the groundwork for Sea of Stars and
Yeah.
DLC releases, and then the whole team transitions over to we're now ready to kind of just start producing on
Yeah.
Sea of Stars until it's done. And we're actually doing the same thing now. We had the summit 3 weeks ago. So we are
Awesome.
working on DLC for Sea of Stars, and we're a smaller team is starting the groundwork for the next game, which we'll eventually all transition to when we're ready.
I love it. So actually, I just, we'll obviously get to Sea of Stars in a bit, but talking
Mhm.
about this post-launch thing, I remember when I reached out to Unlu at Kowloon Nights and I was like,
Mm,
Unlu, we want to speak to Terry
yeah.
about Sea of Stars on the podcast. Let's hook it up. And Claudio
Mm,
started talking to you. The first thing
mm,
Unlu said was they're on holidays or they're going to be on
mm.
holidays after the game.
All right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
talk to me a little bit about that as well, because you
Mm.
mentioned you played Spider-Man 1 and then
Oh yeah.
obviously you played Spider-Man 2, but
Yeah.
the whole team took a break after Sea of Stars?
Yeah. So well, yeah. It's kind of it's kind of like the way we do this is because obviously we don't do like oh no, let's work stupid hours, but
Yeah,
people
yeah,
get
yeah.
invested. They kind of naturally get
Yeah,
invested.
yeah. The push
Uh,
towards an end of a video game, yeah, of course.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
a
yeah.
camel needs
And
to pass through the eye of a needle.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And it's a very different conversation to like actual crunch, but it's like there is something where people seem to naturally want to kind of get more out of their craft for a little bit from time to time because they're invested and
yeah,
lunch is coming.
yeah,
And so that's what we do is we close we everyone gets we close the studio's door for a month and everyone is paid without using like their vacation time. It's like your job for
love
the
it.
next month is to not work. We did that after Messenger, a full month off for everyone, and then we did that again for Sea of Stars. It was a little bit like the thing is it does cause a bit of delay into like patching any issue or
Yeah,
whatever.
of
But
course.
actually,
Yeah,
what we did is because our QA happens with an external firm,
yeah.
and so they kept filing everything.
Oh
And when
no,
we
a
came back,
month of bugs to come back
yeah,
to you
yeah, a month of bugs,
after.
a whole month of bugs. And then when we came back, it was basically, well, we have our work cut out for us of like doing
Yeah,
this first like patch for the game, try to fix as much as possible of the
yeah.
major issues that we're seeing or like typos or whatever. And so yeah, so that's basically how we got back, which is also a good way to get back in the saddle. Is like, I'm just gonna fix a few bugs instead of like let's start
Yeah,
off directly
totally.
on the next big thing. It's like, now let's slowly kind of get the machine going again.
Yeah, like a re-entry into the game dev atmosphere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing.
Mm,
All right. So let's move on to Sea of Stars,
mhm.
because obviously that's the primary reason why we're here as well. It's just released to amazing, amazing acclaim and also success. Like, tell me as well what you sold 1 million copies in like what 3 days, 4 days?
It's been pretty crazy. We got we
That's
got
one way to say it for sure.
the the where we're sitting right now, but I have to say though it does include like we have like Game Pass and
Yeah,
we're on the PlayStation catalog as well.
yeah,
But we passed the 4 million installs for the game.
that is
So
wild.
yeah,
That's
it's
so, and I mean, look, just so everyone knows, I mean, we're talking about release was only what a month and a half ago as well, or
yeah,
two
yeah.
months ago. So it's
Mm,
like
mm,
that's just absolutely wild. four
yeah.
million installs in like just a
Mm,
couple of months, and the
mm.
game deserves it as well. So we'll
Oh,
obviously get onto
thank you.
that, but let's let's talk about the inception of Sea of Stars. So you do the
Yeah.
messenger, and you do like you go on your break, you do a DLC, and there's another team, and obviously the first almost like 20 minutes of this podcast we're talking about Chrono Trigger, so it's not such a hard idea for us and our listeners to get our head around how Sea of
Mm,
Stars. It feels like maybe it was your master plan all along, even
mhm.
down to the two characters on the on the concept art, or sorry, the
Right.
key art.
Yeah.
But talk to me about Sea of Stars, and for you, what personally, motivated you into bringing this game into life, and that being your next thing after the Messenger.
Mm. Well, okay. So as you mentioned, it was the plan all along. The thing was the so Ninja Gaiden and especially two and Chrono Trigger were kind of like the two big games. Super Mario RPG was another gigantic one, and so
Yeah,
by the time I could read a bit more English, I really got into JRPGs.
yeah,
And for me, like any game that was coming out, I was like, is it going to be the one? And I was looking for the one that would have the Chrono Trigger style encounters, like with no transition to an arena,
yeah,
like
yeah,
to like a separate like screen wipe and
yeah,
then
yeah. I love
battle
that
arena.
about Sea of Stars too. Yeah, it's fantastic.
That, but also the Super Mario RPG active input during battle.
Yeah,
I was like kind of like my dream as like games were coming out and I was tracking announcements and just being a huge fan of Square
yeah,
was like, oh, is it going to be this one where everything is seamless and also everything is active? And
yeah,
to my knowledge, it never happened.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that was the main. That was kind of like the main. I don't say justification, but it's like no, we're gonna make the pixel art turn-based RPG that
yeah.
combat happens seamlessly and that also you have active inputs. And also the third, the lesser discussed inspiration is Illusion of Gaia. If you remember jumping off the roof in that game, how tactile that felt, like
Yeah,
just jumping off the roof and landing, and it was kind of like, which is our whole like traversal thing outside of combat in Sea of Stars is like we called it just a world you can touch. One of the pillars for the game was like we wanted a very tactile world,
yeah. It feels
so
that way for sure. I remember
seamlessly like entering water and things like
the
that.
first
Yeah.
time the stone giant yeeted me to another
Oh yeah.
to another part of the world, I was like, "Whoa!" I actually like
Yeah.
literally vocally made a sound on the couch. It was great.
Right, right. And yeah, this idea that you can touch and feel everything, like hoisting and then like grabbing the ledges, and it seems like it was kind of like a level of like sort of unshackled, traversal of the world
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
you seldom see in a game of that genre with that kind of camera angle and art direction. So it
Mm.
felt like there was something there as well to that makes it more in tune as well with the active side of combat. It's like the game throughout the game, there's a sense for the kinetics and the tactile feel of it.
Yeah. It's yeah, and it really feels like it's seems like you achieved your pillars that you set out to achieve, because
Mm,
I felt like as I was playing the game, those things immediately stood out to me, like the
huh?
tactility of the world, jumping off the ledges and smashing through the
Yeah.
ground into the caves, and the
Mm,
vaulting, and even just the verticality of the world as well, because as you
right.
were saying, a lot of the time with that elevated camera that so many of these retro JRPGs had,
Mm,
that verticality isn't there a lot of the time, especially with
right.
tactility. And yeah, I mean, the active components in what is often a very stilted combat mechanic in games,
Hmm.
and has been historically, and sometimes even to this day,
Mm,
is like whether it be sneaking up on people to get your little sneak attack
yeah.
before it starts, which is then
Yeah.
compounds with the live
Hosting.
the
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
is it live MP, what's it called, the
Live mana. Yeah.
live mana, yeah, like it just, these elements really come together well, to that even though the genre itself does have these core constraints that do make it a little bit stop starty, you found these beautiful ways to almost like, when I was playing it yesterday, it felt like, if you're putting something together and there are seams, it's almost like you put strapping or like some tape or something over the seams to smooth those moments to make sure that
Mm,
it had that flow, and it really feels that way. So tell me about the
right.
prototyping process. So you've got these pillars,
Mm,
you've got this idea for the game, obviously, that
mm,
and then you finally got it. I think as
mm,
a game developer, we have these games like, we've all got those games that we're wanting to see, right? It's like
mm,
like you're saying, wait, why isn't there a game like this or that? Or I want to play this
mm.
game, and either someone will make it for you. So for me, I always
Yeah.
wanted to see essentially what was Ghost of Tsushima. Whenever anyone would ask me what was
Oh,
my favorite game, I'd be like, a game where you're a samurai and it's RPG, but then there
yeah.
is the different. You've got to toe that line between the ninja life
Mm.
and the samurai life.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
15-year-old boy idea.
Yeah, yeah,
But then Sucker Punch went and made
yeah.
it, and I'm like, first of all, bummed that I don't get to make it, but secondly,
Mm.
ecstatic that I can enjoy it as a
Oh,
gamer.
yeah.
Right. So
Mm,
you've reached this point where now, as a developer, you've got your dream game sort of in your hands. You've got it in a stranglehold. You're ready to start.
mm,
What were those first few months like? What did you start with? Like, what was the prototyping
mm.
phase like with that core crew that you were saying whilst everyone
Right,
else was
right.
on the DLC?
Well, so one thing is that the ideation, like the sort of the early steps of the game happened over years. Like that game was being discussed before even Sabotage was
Ah,
founded,
okay, right, yeah.
and
So
so it
you
was
knew that
basically
it was
like
the next
this.
game.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of like we need a team that's too big for a startup,
yeah,
and we need budget that's too big for a first like pitch to a publisher,
yeah,
and it's also a game that's too sort of intricate with its systems. It will be like what we used to say with Messenger is like, I jump, therefore I am, right? You look at 5 seconds of the game, everyone understands what it is. They don't
yeah,
need to
yeah,
kind of like infer. And whereas if you present like a turn-based RPG, it's kind of like, well, okay, anyone can make that GIF, and we've seen that promise many times, but
yeah,
do all these systems genuinely land in a way that I care to engage with?
yeah,
Just felt like a tougher. I'm not saying that's like necessarily a rule of law, but that's how we felt. It was like it
yeah,
was probably harder to not market, but kind of like a harder proposition to kind of have come across and have people believe in it. And so the idea was Messenger was a small team can do this. We can hopefully put our name on the map, and then
mhm,
if we are kind of seen as a sort of a seal of quality, and then we propose something more intricate, people can be like, well, okay, since it's these guys, maybe I'll believe. And it's something we saw a lot in the comments. We started with a Kickstarter for the game, which people who have played the previous game, they were like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna round everything to a higher number in my assumption that they will do this right, because they did the previous one right, kind
yes,
of. And
yeah,
that really 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 helped. But also, yeah, we had to scale the team almost 4x, right? So that also meant
wow,
it's a very different challenge. But yeah, but to your question though, when we actually, like, after the summit, everyone got the pitch, we're getting to work.
yeah,
The first thing we always do. Because if there's only one rule at Sabotage, is you never make something pretty until you've made it fun, right? And so we let
I love
everything
it.
be gray boxes. We want the art, the paint. We call it the paint.
Yeah,
We want it to be like added value. We never want it to be like like if you make it pretty, you can there's something to fall in love with.
yeah,
And so then maybe it's not fun, but you're not seeing it because you're too busy like liking the robe or whatever.
yeah,
And so we make a point like we need gray boxes here. We just need gray blocks until it's actually genuinely engaging. So we make an ugly like stick figure character that has all the placeholder functions
yeah,
that we need for traversal, and we developed what we call them the three C's, because our level designers from the Ubisoft method, but three C's being
yeah,
camera, character, and controls, obviously,
yeah,
which is the core of everything that you're going to do in the game. Do I care to be this character? Do I feel cool playing that character? Do the controls feel right? And does the camera support that properly? And so we worked on the three C's for, I want to say, almost a year,
yeah. Wow.
uh, while we had a technical artist working on the dynamic lighting system,
Hmm.
and while we also had a tools programmer working, developing all the tools that we would need for the production. So for
Yeah,
almost a year, it was just that three C's and tools. And then Art was doing like sketching and like research for art direction, like mood boards and like some rendering tests of like what the pixel art could feel like. But it was like, but for now, we just need this to control. and to
Yeah.
feel great. And what we love about looking at it has to be 0% of why we enjoy playing the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really like the main pillar was is always gameplay for us.
Hmm. And it's interesting because, like, I mean, in a game like Sea of Stars, obviously there's, like you say, you've got to have those layers of gameplay. So, how
Mm,
many layers of those came on in that sort of core grey box? Obviously, I imagine it
mm,
was the traversal with some of those things.
mm,
I imagine it's the active and seamless fights, and
mhm.
combat.
Yeah.
Where did you do you remember how tight or sort of where the bounds of that first initial sort of prototyping when you could, get to the point where, as we've said, the shovel hits
Mm,
the metal or it's
mhm.
fun and you're
Yeah,
ready
yeah.
to lay on the paint.
Most of it was the for the combat system,
Yep.
because I was really trying to design something where it would be low numbers.
Yep.
And the low numbers are everywhere in the game. I have these high level notes of like things that I find annoying that I wish we
Yep.
could kind of do differently. One of them being like when the shopping experience is basically, are there more digits in my wallet than on this up price tag, and
Yeah.
that's all you're really, because the numbers are so big, you can't, like, you do one fight, you get 17,000, you don't know what. And I
Yeah.
wanted
It's too
like,
abstract.
yeah, I wanted like 50 gold to still mean something to the player
Hmm.
even in the late game. And so it's kind of like this approach of like the low numbers, things you can understand, and always this kind of like push and pull with everything, that you
Yeah.
stay in that like that kind of friction zone, but
Yeah.
in a good way, right?
Yeah.
That you're feeling like what your decision has like weight. And so a smaller kit for every character, like very few spells, but because there's the active aspect to it, and then it being more around. So sorry, Final Fantasy X was
Yeah.
another big inspiration in how, oh, this character is fast, so this character can do it. This character needs elemental magic, so this character. So it's not that
Yes.
you have your heavy hitter that's always your go-to. It's that situationally everyone gets to shine. There will every character will, you can still have a favorite narratively,
Yeah.
but they will each have moments to shine. And so the idea is that yes, they each only have 3 special moves, but then we
Hmm.
have 26 combos,
Yeah.
which are things that any player can infer because they are extensions of the simple mechanics that you will learn with each of them. And so when we present locks to break with different damage types, then every move that you do is not only about how much damage it deals, it's also about the utility of it.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at these patterns, these attack patterns. It's like multi-hit or AoE, or like we need to do sun and blunt. Okay, I don't have one character that does this, but combining these two would probably give me that.
Yeah.
Um, and so building that system, like, okay, does that in fact or not lead to a different dynamic for the combat system? Because I was trying
Yeah.
to avoid, like, you have this big mana pool, you're never using your spells on regular fights, and then on the boss you do nothing but the one heavy spell that you have, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
and so the solve for that was the mana pool is so small,
Yeah.
but every time you do a regular attack, you regain a good portion of it. And
Yeah.
so if you're attacking on a full bar, you feel like you're wasting regeneration, so you're going to be using your special moves in regular fights.
Yeah.
And you can't be spamming them because after one or two you're empty, so you have to pace
Yeah.
that with attacks. And that
Yeah.
just the idea of that with the lux that are kind of passing like commands to the player, like, oh, try to do like 3 poison and 1 blade,
Yeah.
that kind of creates a dynamic where the player will naturally be varying what they're using, and then the
Mhm.
animations that they see playing, and there isn't like a thing you'll never you just put under the carpet. You'll be using everything because everything has a use
Yeah.
in certain situations. So anyway, that was kind of like the vision basically.
It's great.
uh,
And so it sounds like a lot of that came out organically from that prototyping process of where
mhm.
there's some things that are in the game now as part. I'm talking about the combat mechanics specifically
Yeah.
now. Was there anything that you brought to it immediately that you and the team knew before you even started prototyping it up? It's like, okay, like for
Mm.
example, the active sort of fights that not going to another page,
Oh
or
yeah.
some of these mechanics that you're talking about and the
Mm.
way that they interact. What
Mm.
did you actually go to the prototyping with, as opposed to things that sort of fell out of it organically?
Right. Well, so the active part, like the pressing to reduce the incoming damage, that was there from the initial pitch. It was like,
Yeah,
we're
right.
doing the Chrono Trigger Super Mario RPG, like it's never been
Yeah,
done. We need to do that. That was kind of like the premise. Then the Lux system were really just kind of like, because again, back to the Final Fantasy X reference, was
yeah,
like it was really fun to feel like each character has their time to shine,
yeah,
but it was like, how do we take that conversation further? Because it's like every enemy really comes down to who can kill it in a single hit. And you either do that or it's 4 hits from anyone else.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, okay, can we make something more with that where the same enemy can randomize a pattern
Yeah.
that will mean that there's not always like the one go-to thing to get rid of that in a single hit, and there's also a skill aspect to it, because if
Yeah.
there's more than one luck, maybe you need to time your presses properly.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of adding those layers, but really it's just more peeling, basically,
Yeah.
like more things to kind of work on. But it's really like the Final Fantasy X idea of like the rock paper scissor aspect
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it, but with more layers.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like sort of the premise. It's like, let's have rock paper scissor with layers, basically.
Yeah. I love it. All right, so then let's talk about, you've mentioned, you needed to scale the team to 4x
Mm,
and that this is a much
mm,
grander game than you had before. So in this prototyping phase, I imagine that's at the forefront of your mind.
mhm.
Devolver published Messenger, but we actually share partners. We both of our games are co-funded
Yeah,
by Kowloon
yep.
Knights, and they were your partner for Sea of
Mm,
Stars as well. So,
mhm.
when did Alexi and co over at Kowloon come onto the scene for a Sea of
Yeah,
Stars?
it was Callum Underwood back in the day.
Yeah, yeah,
Who
yeah. I
was
remember.
still
Yeah.
the yeah, and so basically, and he like saw the project and he really believed, and he sent emails. Um, so yeah, big thanks. We owe a lot to
Shout
Callum.
out to Callum. We
Oh
love
yeah, for
Callum.
sure. Oh yeah. And so what happened is we decided that we wanted to self-publish, uh, and that's not any slight on Devolver. They're as good as it gets, and
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely would do again.
yeah,
They've been nothing but amazing. But we actually just wanted, like, we want to fully do this, like,
yeah,
on this journey as developers. We want to feel like we actually did do everything.
yeah.
They
No, I
really
get it.
helped.
We're the
It
same. Yeah,
put us, oh yeah, it's like they really helped. It put us on the map. It was a big seal of approval. We got a lot of press. We made a lot of contacts, because the fact that they signed our game was news, right? So it's like
yeah,
it
massive.
helped.
Yeah,
It helped tremendously. But it's like, now that we kind of had this velocity, we're like, okay, cool, can we like be even more on our own, right? Because we want to see how far we can kind of take this on our own. And then, so what we did with the Kickstarter was, because we were all in, right?
yeah,
The first game did well. You scale your team 4x, and you look at 5 years of production, you're empty for sure. So
yeah.
it's like, the Kickstarter was the Kickstarter was it's always a bit kind of, not complicated, but it's kind of hard to talk about this a little bit, because you
Right.
don't
Okay.
want kind of like, I mean, I'm happy to discuss with you. What I meant is,
Yeah.
like, in general, like, when you're public facing, it's kind of hard to talk about the real costs of making a
Of
production,
course. Yeah. It's. I
because
think as well. There's something that it's really interesting, especially when you're a self-publishing as a
mm,
developer, and you're looking at all of the costs and what it
hmm
takes, just like
yeah,
because again, just so everyone knows, a lot of people make the mistake thinking that Kowloon Knights is a publisher. They're not. Kowloon Knights is essentially a games fund, and they finance projects, and obviously they also have Kepler as well. A lot of the people involved in Kowloon, are involved in Kepler too, and Kowloon now sits under Kepler, and Kepler is a publishing arm. So they have the contacts, they have the capabilities and everything, but if you're assigned to Kowloon Knights, basically you've received some games funding, which you
yeah,
got, and it's to enable folks like us to self-publish, or for folks like us to then go and find another publisher. It's to help get
yeah,
independent projects off the ground.
hmm
Amazing work. But what I was going to say in response to what you're saying about the realities of funding a game and everything is that I think even with the open and transparent development that we have with the community, and how involved almost more than any other medium the
mm,
audience is in regards to the creation of our craft and our games and our
mm,
products, there is still this, like, the understanding of what it takes to make a game, and the
yeah,
especially around the budgets and the
yeah,
costs and things is
mm,
just it's not one to one. It's not even
mm,
close. And
yeah,
I totally agree. It makes it very hard. I remember it came out recently that Horizon Zero Dawn cost 250 million
oh
bucks to
yeah,
make, and there were folks even in the games industry who were like, "Whoa, what the fuck?" And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, there's a huge amount of I think education that still needs to
mm,
happen. I don't even know if it's possible for it to be fully successful,
yeah,
for our audiences around what it actually costs and makes, you know, what it costs to make a video game. And I think things like Kickstarter, as fantastic as they are out there, when you see a
yeah,
Kickstarter game get funded for like 500 grand and it's successful and you're like, yes, it's like, well, after you take out Kickstarter's cut, all the
yeah,
rewards and everything, that's only going to fund what 8% of the game or
Oh
10%
yeah.
of the game, maybe,
Yeah.
right? So I totally
Mm,
get you. It is a really
mm.
strange thing to talk, an awkward thing also to talk publicly about like what these games cost and how
Oh
much,
yeah.
say, for example, a Kickstarter campaign has contributed to the
Mm.
development of something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the way, well, I mean, yeah, you're yes to everything you said. You're exactly right. And the thing is, we're trying, like, the second you try to bring the reality of the finances to the players,
Yeah,
it just kind of becomes uncomfortable. And our thing is like, look, we're the service that we're trying to provide is we make a game for you that's fun to play, and
yeah,
it's just more comfortable if we don't talk about that too much. We
yeah. That's
understand.
fair. Yeah,
Having said that, we still need to figure it out because the game needs to happen,
yeah.
and so we were blessed with a successful Kickstarter. We raised a million US bucks
Amazing.
with it. Yeah, but as you said, there people don't know about Kickstarter, Scott. People don't know about, we're in Canada, so the taxes come knocking, and it's not
That's it.
5%.
Yeah,
You
someone's
know,
paying for the
it's
CMF, right? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
so and so when it comes down to it, you're like, well, okay, now we now have a few months of production
yeah,
accounted for when we need 5 years.
yeah, yeah,
And it's like, but if you say this, people are like, no, wait, I thought you owned the boat now,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and so it's like you can't. I don't know if there is a way to kind of convey that properly for people, but the thing is that. So the reason why we did a Kickstarter wasn't so much to finance the game.
Hmm.
Um, it was more like a marketing and awareness beat, and
Yeah,
a social proof beat,
yeah.
right? It's like, okay,
Like a
we're going
market test
all in.
almost, right?
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
we're spending, we're taking the treasure chest from Messenger, and we're emptying it on purpose to make this next thing.
yeah.
So here's a sanity check. Will people be there to buy this
Yeah,
if
at
we
the
make
other
it,
end of this
or
journey.
we'll
Yeah,
just empty? Yeah.
yeah,
And so that
clever.
was a big validation, which is also how we got in the loop with, for example, Kowloon Knights or any other publishers that wanted to
Yeah,
talk, is that having a successful campaign like that, it validated the idea that there was sort of, if you want, a market for it.
yeah,
And so when publishers were reaching out to talk, it kind of inverts the power dynamic. Instead of
yeah,
like, oh, we're starving devs, can you please give us a second look? They're like, hey, we know you have something that is going to pan out, or it looks like it, so we really
yeah,
want to invest. And so that allowed us to really put our own sort of terms and conditions forward, and we said no to a lot of things because we're like, look, we feel like we're in a good position and we're going to be able to get what the game is worth, and we still want to self publish it. And so it's looking like it's probably, there were still a few options out there. And then Kowloon, I mean, obviously you work with them as well, so you would know, but they're, I mean, they're just really amazing. They genuinely trust their people, and that
yeah.
was something that, because we hear from other devs with other publishers, or they get other deals, and I think we were really blessed in terms of that with Devolver and Kowloon afterwards. Is 100% of my experience is, well, when people sign your game, it's because they trust you, so then they just let you do your thing.
Yeah.
That seems to be very rare. So
Yeah, that's you're in for a rude awakening. There are a couple of
yeah.
publishers out there where you would be in for a rude awakening, I'm
Mm,
sure. But like you've
right.
definitely had, like at least in the indie scene, the pick of the litter there for sure.
Mm,
Really great
yeah.
run, and they are phenomenal. Like we've been working with Kowloon now since
Mm,
early 2021, and
mm.
it's absolutely exactly what you say. Like
Oh yeah.
the trust that they have in their teams. Sometimes, like at the start, we were checking. I remember we asked them to get on a call to give them an update because it was about a year in, and I could tell
Mm,
on the call, although they were interested, they were kind of just like, we don't need to be here. Like, why are we here? We trust you. Like, just
yeah,
make just make the game. You
yeah,
don't need to update us. We get it. Like,
yeah,
that's why we're here. And they've just been even to the like this day, they're just so supportive.
right.
They're a really great crew, and it's a fantastic model.
Mm,
I mean, there's a really the funding landscape is great and the is vast, and the publishing landscape and everything in regards to where, but just people coming along and providing an opportunity for talented creatives. Like I'm going
mm.
to put you and I and our teams in that bucket, right? Like
Yeah,
where
yeah.
we actually want a shot at self-publishing our games is just,
Mm,
it's actually, and with terms that are reasonable and respectable,
yeah.
it's hard to find. And I think they
Mm,
fit a really great spot in the funding landscape. And I hope honestly that more of them come along as well.
mm.
Other organizations similar to Kowloon. All right, so
Right.
that you got that deal through, and then that's you're off and you're running. You're off to the races, as we
Hmm.
would say. When did you sort of transition the team over, and like let's talk about some of the big moments in development, like some of the big challenges, or give me a sort of like a 10,000 feet in the sky view of like what those challenges were.
Well, the big one was the lockdown, obviously, because so we had,
Right. Yeah.
it's Sea of Stars, like Sun and Moon, super
Yeah.
cute and all. So it's like we're gonna announce at the spring equinox, which is the Thursday of GDC. So we're gonna be out at
In
GDC
2020, I imagine you're
in
saying. Yeah. Yeah.
2020, and we have a suite, right? And
Yeah.
press is just gonna roll in all day. I'm gonna give the initial pitch, and the
Yeah.
Kickstarter launches on that day with a big like press thunderclap, where like everything has been, we're all super buttoned up, ready to go. And then yeah, 2 weeks prior, it's like there's no GDC, and obviously, we're just catching on to the idea that it's
It's
not
more
going to
than
be
that.
super
Yeah.
fun for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're like, oof, do we still do it? Right.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like the big moment, because it's like the Kickstarter is make or break,
Yeah.
and we're launching a Kickstarter like as the lockdown
Yeah. As the
kicks off.
world's falling apart. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. And it was like, man, that is really super weird. And so we kind of just went like the sort of the purpose route, which was
Yeah.
like, look, we're entertainers.
Yeah.
People need something pretty to look at. They need their
Yeah.
mind off of whatever's going on. Like, what a
Yeah.
unique moment to kind of fulfill our role.
Yeah. Art survives
Uh,
in even the darkest of times, right?
mm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. And so that kind of that made us say like, look, we don't really care about the risk. There's like meaning behind doing that, regardless of what happens. And so it happened to pan out. But I don't think it was like necessarily a wise business decision to
Yeah.
not hold on. Um, and then yeah, it worked out. And so from there, it was basically like, well, okay, we made the successful campaign, but we can't celebrate, which is a very minor gripe, all things considered. But still, it was
Yeah.
kind of like, if we're just talking about production, it was like,
No,
it
of
kind of
course.
sucks.
Yeah. We're talking about
Yeah,
you. So, yeah, it's
yeah.
totally fair for you to
It's like,
talk
hey,
about
a
how you
Zoom
felt.
call of like, hey, we did it. We're
Oh,
funded.
God.
Like, yeah, and
Yeah.
not what we envisioned, let's say.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
bet.
and so yeah, and after that, it was basically like put our head down for the better part of a year,
Yeah.
while we were having conversations. My business partner, Phil, and I, were having just business conversation with potential publishers. And eventually Kowloon became kind of like, oh no, that's the one, like that sounds too good to be true, let's dig in. And okay, it's actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's both too good and true, so let's just do it. uh,
Yeah.
Basically, it was the conclusion.
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, and then from there, it was mostly production. I would say we most of it happened on lockdown. And we, because for the better part of 2 years, basically, right,
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to work remotely. And it went, we let it go slower than it would have if we were on site. We kind of had that understanding. We're happy
Yeah.
to let people work remote now, but we do see kind of like a dip if we're not often present at the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
Just from this, just pointing at the screen and asking these questions, and there's
No,
just no
totally. I
friction
get it.
to getting on a call for a question. Whereas
I was
if
talking
you're
to
there,
someone
you'll
about
just
it.
ask.
I was talking to someone about it yesterday. Obviously, you can ship fantastic games from home. Like, it's not like
Of
it can't
course.
be done. Like what
Mm,
Spider-Man 2, we were just talking about it. They
yeah.
ship that entire, the crew can work wherever they want. Obviously, there's folks
Yeah.
in the office too, but like
Right.
they can do that from wherever they want at
Mm,
Insomniac. But like I agree, like what our experience too is, just one of those things that you do miss when you're remote is those happy accidents of like
mm.
hearing someone talk about something and being like, oh no, I did that yesterday. You don't need to spend 5 hours on that. Or yeah,
Exactly.
looking at the screen together in the quick repartee, it is
Yeah.
something that I think we do, you do
Mm,
actually miss out on when you're working from
mm,
home. And I think as well, honestly, because we experienced lockdown happened, we were working on a project with Private Division, and like
mm.
the lockdown, we had fucking 300 days or something like that of actual
Right.
lockdowns and curfews in Melbourne. It was gnarly.
Ooh.
And we were in the depths of pre-production on like a
Ah.
brand new game and ID and IP and everything. And so, like I was saying before about our analogies, like the game was in all of our heads and we couldn't even be
Mm,
in the same room. We
yeah.
couldn't have four people in front of a whiteboard or,
Mm,
trying to get it onto a screen together. And
mm,
yeah, it can be really full on at different periods
yeah.
of development. So I can appreciate like,
Mm,
you're announcing the game, you're still in early stages and you're all working from home, trying to get that game onto a screen, as we were saying,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, from there, the big, I mean, the one big thing that happened was we were in a Nintendo Direct.
Yeah,
That
huge
was
for this
probably,
genre of game as well. Like
yeah,
that's got to be massive. Yeah,
yeah. No, that was unreal. And then that made us have to, because there's got to be some, you got to offer something. So it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have, and of course you're gonna have like some areas you've never shown before, bosses you've
Yeah.
never shown before, reveal a new playable character, things like that. But we also chucked in like, we're gonna announce a release date for the game.
Oh, right.
And
Awesome.
so yeah, and so we committed to our release date through the direct. That was last February. So,
Yeah.
and then from there was like, okay, now it needs to it needs to happen.
How did you find that? Because I mean, that's the classic thing when you're self-publishing too,
Mm,
right? Like that
mm,
responsibility is on you.
yeah.
We're very shortly, I think probably by the time this podcast has come out, we will have, this episode, we will have announced the release date for Solium Infernum. But the
Woo.
conversation inside is in the studio is like, because it's
Uh,
literally publishing works in the same studio as the developers, and you're like,
yeah.
is it go? Is it not? And I mean, we
Mm,
missed the window. I think we definitely waited too late on the Jump Light Odyssey release date because,
okay.
like some articles are coming out about like biggest games launching in August already before
Mm.
we'd announced that we were going to launch in August too.
Oh,
So
right,
it's,
right.
and
Uh-huh.
like, I'm keen to talk to you about the release date because we released, I mean, we launched into early access with Jump
Mm,
Light Odyssey, but I mean, we were like 5 days apart or 7 days apart or something like that.
right.
And it was a crazy month. So
Mm.
like you
Oh
and
yeah.
neither of us would have known this, in February of
Yeah.
last year or whatever,
Oh yeah.
right? So
Mm,
talk to me about that because obviously it's gone very, very well for you. But like coming into that release date, how are you
mm.
feeling both on the team and sort of looking at the market and what was happening?
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing is when, as you said, like when we committed to the
Yeah,
date,
yeah.
there was no Starfield and no Baldur's Gate 3 in the vicinity.
And you're like threading the needle, like
And
you're
we ended up releasing like in between
yeah,
those two,
same.
right? So, whew, that was honestly, that, like, we'll never know what would have happened if,
Yeah,
but our thing is like, because I mean, obviously, the behind the scenes, but it's like moving a date, if you're not, like, we're not a big fish, it's like
yeah,
we're just happy to be there and for people to give us the time of day, and it's like we got everything lined up, we're in a
yeah,
direct, we're on the PlayStation store for that date, we have a Game Pass thing going
yeah.
on. We don't want to start like contacting everyone like, hey, y'all mind if we move for like a month because
Yeah,
it's
they're
better
like, yeah,
timing.
we do mind.
And it's like, yeah, and the thing is,
Yeah,
yeah, we're kind of trying to be like just a good neighbor, we want to be
yeah,
like, look, that's what we said, that's what we're going to do, we're going to be
yeah,
a developer that you can put on a list somewhere, as like we made very little noise and things fell into place the way we
yeah,
said they would, and that helps us in the future because we have sort of that credibility with partners moving forward,
yeah,
even though that we definitely took some kind of hit when it comes to like the initial launch and the exposure we were able to get. It was a
yeah,
very small pressure cooker of like, let's just maximize, but and we were blessed with a super good response, but still, uh, you know we we also like to think that it's a type of game that can be evergreen. It's not like a
yeah.
2023 game where the smoke effects are outdated next year. It's like it's a you know what I mean? Like it could
Yeah,
have
no, I know
come out
exactly. That's why
3
I'm
years
laughing. Yeah,
ago, and it could have had the same response like 3 years ago, or like
yeah,
in 3 years. It's kind of like it sits in a place where, and even if we look at Messenger, the second year was better than the first one.
yeah,
Um, the like Hollow Knight, the best game from 2018 that came out in 2017, right? And so it's that happens. So
yeah,
it's not so
totally.
much about the initial like launch and then it's over, but we're thinking about this more long term. So we're kind of not, we don't want to feel hung up too much about the launch date. But I don't think we could have picked a worse one,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, I know. It just like honestly, August this year was the craziest release year I've seen in video games. I think in my entire career, it was
Oh yeah.
just bonkers. And like studios like ours, and I think Kowloon just had 4 or 5 games. Like
Oh,
their studios were shipping games all at the same time. It was like On Guard and Shadow Gambit and us and
oh
you.
yeah.
It was just weird. It was a very strange time to be making games in the indie scene. Terrifying as
Yeah,
well. But no, really
absolutely.
glad that you got that cut through and everything. And the Game Pass stuff and, having those larger partners helps so much as well, cutting through the noise. It's a big thing about self-publishing, especially at the scale that, we work at. Because now, we've got 2 teams, but like you, you've got one team, but it's a similar size to us now.
Mm,
Like our teams, each
right.
team is about 25. to 30 folks if you include the
Okay.
publishing side of
Yeah.
things. And like when you're operating at our size, like you really depend on those larger partners to have that cut
Mm,
through, because it's
mm,
an interesting space that like folks like you and us and me and others in
mm,
around this size, in that what I would call that like sort of like triple I space or whatever,
mm.
inhabit, because when we're self-publishing, because we have to do all of the guerrilla indie marketing tactics, right? Like
Yeah.
everything, being in the next fest and hitting packs
Yeah.
and all this sort of stuff, like having our socials, our discords going so we can drive wish lists, right? Trying to get into
Mm,
any Steam festivals that we can and all
mm.
that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
then we also, because of the scope of our games and the ROI that we need to make on the sales, like we also then need to enact some of the like triple A marketing tactics, but we
Oh
don't
yeah.
have their spend,
Right.
So
Right.
it's like, so it really, like, we depend so much on that Game Pass marketing and the
Mm,
PlayStation marketing. Like, it's funny that you talk about Kickstarter, because the two biggest things that pushed Armello to the world, like whenever we talk about it, someone mentions Armello, or they always discovered it in one of two ways mostly.
huh.
Either was via our Kickstarter or via a global marketing campaign that PlayStation did for 3 indie games, of which we were one, called Vote to
Huh.
Play. And so, did you find like,
Huh.
do you remember seeing uplift or something from the Game Pass deal? Like, was there definitely like a momentum that brought to your game, and the awareness that the
Oh, for
Kickstarter
sure.
did as well? Yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. Well, so the Kickstarter did do that. Obviously, it raised the awareness, and also like just if we look at marketing and things like that, is since the studio has some history now, we can leverage some things, right? So one
yeah,
example that's like completely from left field, from just the perspective of that one game, is with Messenger. We did the only way to get on the Epic Game Store back in the day was you go in through their catalog for like a couple of weeks, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
we
of
did
course.
that, and Messenger got like, I don't know, like something like 3 million like claims. Not,
Yeah, okay.
not saying necessarily installs and like
Yeah,
playthroughs
but
or
people
whatever, but like,
claim the game. Yeah.
yeah, and as people claim it, they can opt into a newsletter.
Oh shit,
And so we had like, I think something like, I should ask Phil, but I think we had like 300,000
that is
like
wild.
emails of people who opted in on their own to hear from us. And
That's
so
crazy.
yeah,
Also,
so
for
can you
folks,
imagine?
just
So
so people know, like for folks listening who may not be aware or across the sort of the marketing and publishing
mm,
area of video games, a customer email is like the most valuable thing you can have as a publisher or
mm,
marketer. It's why it's on everything. You read any article on the internet, it asks for your email,
mm,
all that sort of stuff. But because then it means you can market directly to your consumers. Whereas, for us, if people are on Steam, we can only use Steam's. So the fact, like having
mm.
300,000 emails is just like, is game changing. That's
and
huge.
but it's
Especially
also
for a
like
Kickstarter, right?
people. But it's also that the box is not ticked by default. It's not like
Yeah, no, they've opted in themselves.
they
Yeah,
opted in themselves, so it's
yeah,
like it's very like, even just from an ethical perspective, it's like it's
yeah,
actually 100% okay to email those
yeah,
people.
yeah.
It's not like we got on a list that some people are sharing. It's not like there
by a
was
list
an
of some Russian
automatic
hackers or
opt-in
something
unless you
like
don't
that.
read
Yeah.
it. Yeah, and so
Man, that's
basically
huge.
we now you want to use that sparingly because you don't want them to
Of
opt out if
course.
you're
Yeah.
spamming or anything, right?
Yeah.
But so for the Kickstarter, they were all we sent that email chain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
um, which, when you have a big list like that, you very quickly learn that Mailchimp charges
A lot.
not so much, but they still charge per email. So it's like, wait, these pennies are adding up, man.
Yeah. There's
but
always some, there's, no matter where you walk in life, there's someone taking a cut somewhere for
oh
sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so yeah, so notifying everyone when the Kickstarter launches kind of gives it this sort of thunderclap effect, right? Where
Yeah.
you kind of have like a critical mass of people clicking the link and like
Yeah.
looking at it, and so that kicks you up in all the algorithms of this world,
Wow.
and then you can also notify them when the game comes out, and things
Yeah.
like that. And so yeah, just developing those channels of like, okay, now we have our Discord is pretty is at a decent size.
Hmm.
We have this mailing list. We have all the Kickstarter backers. We have all people who own the previous game that are in the community hub for Messenger on Steam and things
Yeah.
like that. And so we're kind of like just keeping that conversation going
Yeah.
for people to kind of like engage.
Yeah. And you've not only that, but you've delivered two like great games in a similar aesthetic. So you've got these people united around a
Mm,
particular interest, especially around the nostalgia that you talk about for these type of
mm,
games, and you've
mm.
executed on your promise to them. You were talking about the importance for partners, but even to our community, especially when we're going to Kickstarter, shaking the tin can, trying to get people on board too. Like
Oh yeah.
it
Mm,
really counts for something.
right.
All
No, for
right, so
sure.
like let's talk about what's next, and as much as you can, like this. We're not the Hot Scoops
Sure.
podcast here, right?
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
okay.
not trying to take you down, but like you're back from holidays, you're working through bugs. What's going on for Sabotage right now?
Well, right now we I think we're done. We actually just got done this week with the for the patch for the physical copy of the game. We
Yep.
wanted the physical version to be kind of like if you don't download anything, you're still playing like you know
Yep.
something that's like not like you
Solid.
need to go online for an update. Yeah, yeah, for an
Yep.
update. So yeah, we fixed all the major ones that we found, or that were reported. I mean.
Yep.
So yeah, we got done with that. We're working on the DLC. We're starting to see some assets, some like propositions for environments, and are
Awesome,
coming on
man.
like to the idea. We're seeing like some sketches and everything. Level design has started blocking and everything. I'm writing the script right now. And
Great.
yeah, for the next big game, well, it's the same method as mentioned earlier. So we have a very small team, mostly coders for now, looking at
Mhm.
the tools that we're going to need, looking at the rendering tech that we're going to need, and then also working on those 3Cs, which
Yeah.
the character will look like nothing for a long time. And the areas will also look like nothing for a long
Yep.
time, but we're going to sort of like validate the moment to moment
Yep.
satisfaction feeling of the 3Cs, and then we're going to start transitioning everyone over. But we are so, I mean, I will say it's not like necessarily a scoop or anything. It's something that will just we're
That
just
you
owning
do. Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
Is that I think people understand that when we do like what's fun for us is the game design journey of modernizing a classic,
Yep. Yep.
uh, and so it's not that we'll never tag two at the end of an IP that we
Yep.
made,
Yep.
but what we're really excited about is like, okay, what's the new one? What's the next?
Yeah. The next challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, what's another king that never got a proper spiritual successor, perhaps? So we're that's still very much what what the flame is for us. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. We feel the same way in a lot of ways, and I think it's beautiful. Even if you have IP to, like roll them
Mm,
through different genres or different things. Like I was asked recently by someone why we didn't just do Armello 2, and my answer is that
mm.
Solium Infernum is essentially our Armello
Oh,
2.
sure.
It's very
Huh.
similar turn-based, hex-based game. Solium
Yeah.
Infernum, the original, game from
Yeah.
2009, inspired
Mm,
Armello, but so
mm,
there's that connection there, but it enabled us to have a new challenge. It's like you're saying, like there was this game that didn't get its spiritual successor or its time in the sun really, and as much as
right.
Armello was inspired by it,
Mm,
it is Armello's spiritual successor and is that
mm.
Armello 2. Doesn't stop people from back trying to kick down our door for an Armello 2, and I'm sure
Right.
you're gonna hear that for many years about Sea of Stars as
Of
well. But
course.
no,
Oh
I
yeah.
totally relate, and I think as well just with that vision and that enthusiasm that you're tackling this challenge that you're talking about, this core challenge,
Mm,
like it's why people are obviously showing up for your games now. I
mm.
mentioned it, we're talking to my partner, on the couch, as I was saying, like you've created a Super Nintendo game that like it's almost like someone dusted off in some store in Akihabara and no one knew it existed, and it's
Right.
come back to life in the best game from 1992 that is
Yeah.
now in 2023. So congratulations, it's an
Oh,
amazing achievement.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, hey Terry, I think it's probably a great place to leave it. I've really
Sure.
enjoyed our conversation. Again, congrats on all of your success, folks. If you haven't jumped into the Messenger or Sea of Stars, do dive in. There's something really, really special there, as you can hear from our conversations. And Terry,
Mm.
all the best with the prototyping for the new thing. And I'm keen to tuck into the DLC when it's ready and everything as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome, man. Have a great night.
You too.